Eddard Stark stood at the threshold of a decision that would define the future of the Seven Kingdoms and all the people in it. The chill of the North, still embedded deep in his bones despite the warmer climate of King's Landing, seemed to tighten around his chest as he contemplated Cersei Lannister's words. She had offered him an unthinkable proposition: protect her secret, acknowledge Joffrey's right to the throne as the legitimate son of King Robert, and name him heir publicly. In exchange, she would grant him the security of his family and his own life. There was money involved too, a vast sum that would ensure the prosperity of House Stark, some measure of leverage for the North, and even the chance to exercise a modicum of influence over Joffrey's reign. All it would require was a betrayal of the truth and a betrayal of the very principles that had come to define Eddard Stark. He could almost hear the wind whistling through the towers of Winterfell, carrying the memory of his father's expectations, of everything House Stark was meant to stand for: honor, honesty, steadfastness. His entire life, he had clung to the notion that a man's word was the one unassailable possession he had in the world, and that every choice had consequences beyond mortal reckoning. Yet here, in a cramped, dimly lit solar with golden lions embossed on the walls, Ned Stark contemplated the possibility that stepping away from that unwavering sense of honor might be the only way to save his daughters and, indeed, the entire realm from the nightmare that threatened to descend. Fear for Sansa and Arya gnawed at his soul. Cersei had threatened them indirectly, but the meaning was clear. He saw no path to victory through open conflict with the Lannisters in the heart of the capital. He had tried to warn her, quietly, to leave King's Landing before Robert returned from his hunt. But she had turned his mercy into a moment of opportunity. She had shown him the stakes. Joffrey would be king, the Lannister gold would prop up the realm, and if Ned stayed silent, his family might remain safe. Ned remembered the words of his friend Robert Baratheon, not so long ago, lamenting the burdens of the crown. "I swear to you, Ned, I don't even know if being king is worth a damn when half the time I'm fighting the Lannisters with one hand, and the other half I'm fighting these blasted courtiers with the other." Robert had no idea that the children he claimed as his own were not his, that his wife had been sharing her bed with her brother Jaime. But if Ned revealed that truth without the power to enforce justice, what would come of it? He might spark a civil war or worse. Ned's chest felt tight, and he struggled to breathe. The northern honor within him screamed that this was wrong. But in the darkness of his doubts and fears, the father in him asked, what is the price of honor if it leads to the destruction of the innocent? Would the father who had died in King's Landing decades ago want Ned to play the part of a dutiful fool? Would his father even blame him for sacrificing certain truths if it meant preserving the Stark bloodline? Cersei's voice echoed in his memory. "Take the deal, Lord Stark. I promise you, you will not regret it if you do as I say. We can keep the peace. We can keep your daughters as shining beauties of the court. We can keep your wife safe at Winterfell. And you can remain hand of the king, the second most powerful man in the realm. After all, the crown needs your steady hand far more than you realize. For a man so honorable, consider it your duty to the realm to avoid war and chaos." The Queen Regent's manipulation was obvious, and yet Ned found himself, for once in his life, giving serious consideration to the offer. Littlefinger's smirk flitted through his mind. The Master of Coin had once told him, "Sometimes one must move pieces on a board, Lord Stark, if only to keep them from toppling altogether." Ned loathed the man and his dissembling ways, but was there a kernel of truth in his cynicism? Outside, the sun had begun to set, blanketing King's Landing in orange and purple. Street cries had died down to an evening murmur, and the torches of the gold cloaks lit up the city's walls. Eddard stood by the window, gazing out at the city that reeked of filth and ambition and desperation. Was it right for him to try to burn it all down out of principle? Or to let it remain standing, however rotten, to spare thousands from war? For the first time since he had discovered the abominable truth of Joffrey's parentage, he felt the weight of the realm pressing on him, urging him to yield. The realm was bigger than one man's honor, bigger than one vile secret. He thought of his daughters. Sansa was engaged to Joffrey, painfully naive but proud to be a future queen. She had already suffered heartbreak when his confrontation with the Lannisters had turned sour. Arya was so young, so wild, so stubbornly full of the North spirit. She was a child who could meet with a tragic accident if Ned pushed too far too soon. They were alone in King's Landing, with no allies save for a smattering of household guards and a few loyal companions. Robb was hundreds of leagues away, barely more than a boy, no matter how swiftly he might be forced to grow. And so, with lead in his limbs, Eddard Stark closed his eyes and saw every possibility unraveling. Honor would be sacrificed, but perhaps, in time, justice could be served in a quieter, less explosive way. One day, a truth carefully nurtured might reveal itself without devastation. That day was not today. If he demanded justice at once, the realm would drown in blood, and House Stark might be destroyed in the process. A father's duty outweighed his sense of self. He tasted bile in his throat, but he knew he had no choice. Cersei awaited his answer. When Ned faced her again, he spoke quietly, as if every word was a betrayal of the vow he had made to his father's memory. "My queen," he said, "you have made a compelling case for peace. I will do my duty to the realm, as you suggest, and stand behind Prince Joffrey's claim." Her green eyes regarded him with the wariness of a lioness. "And what of the truths you've uncovered? Will they remain hidden, Lord Stark?" Ned hesitated, his heart pounding. "I will do as you ask," he replied, forcing the words out one by one. "And hold my tongue for the good of the realm and the preservation of House Stark." The tautness in Cersei's shoulders eased by the tiniest fraction, and for a moment Ned thought he caught the flicker of genuine relief pass through her. She was already thinking a dozen steps ahead, plotting new ways to secure her power, but at least for now, Sansa and Arya would be safe. That was the vow Cersei had made, and Ned, despite himself, believed that she would keep it. She might be cunning and cruel, but she was not stupid enough to break a bargain that guaranteed her family's ascendancy. Cersei extended a hand in a gesture that was somewhere between cordial and mocking. Ned did not take it. He offered a stiff half-bow. "Long live the king," he said, feeling as though each word were a drop of his soul's blood spilled onto the floor. So it was done. With that bargain, Eddard Stark surrendered the truth in exchange for security and the promise that House Stark would remain unharmed. At least for the moment, he was no longer the rebellious hand of the king. He was her ally, complicit in the falsehood that Joffrey was Robert's son, and he felt tainted by the knowledge, even as he understood that living to fight another day might be the only chance he had to protect what truly mattered. That night, Eddard wrote letters to Winterfell, to Robb, instructing him to remain vigilant. He wrote not of treason or war, but spoke carefully of alliances to be maintained, of potential unrest that might come from the south. He couched his words in the language of a father concerned for his domain, advising caution. Deep in his mind, a tiny flame of hope burned. Perhaps Robb and the North could prepare quietly without drawing suspicion, so that one day, when the time was ripe, they could act from a position of strength. He also sent messages to Stannis Baratheon, but in a more cryptic tone. He hinted that the realm might soon come into confusion, that he would require Stannis' assistance in matters to preserve King Robert's line. He avoided direct confession of the parentage secret, for that would undo his entire agreement with Cersei, but he wanted to keep lines open to someone who might be a rightful heir. Ned knew Stannis was not a man easily swayed or fooled, but at least the seeds of caution were planted. If, by chance, Robert died or matters came to a critical juncture, perhaps Stannis would suspect something was amiss. Perhaps he would investigate further on his own. The next morning found Ned rising from a bed of restless, haunted sleep. He looked at himself in the mirror, noticing new lines on his forehead, new burdens carved into his visage. Silence weighed on him like a millstone. He put on the hand's chain once more, feeling its metal links press into his neck. He had never felt so far from the man he was at Winterfell, the man who beheaded the deserter with one clean stroke of ice. Now his weapons were words, his opponents were on the dais, and he had no illusions that a single misstep could bring ruin upon them all. In the throne room, Robert's wide grin and heavy-footed steps startled Ned. The king had returned from his hunt with fresh bruises and an addled mind from too much wine, but was otherwise unscathed. Ned felt the measure of relief. At least Robert was still alive. Cersei played the demure wife, standing a short distance away, her face unreadable save for a certain smug confidence. She looked to Ned, and he knew she was recalling his acceptance of her bribe. "Gods, Ned, I hate hunting," Robert bellowed, though Ned recalled how Robert had once said it was the only time he felt truly alive. "My back aches, my hands are scratched to the bone, and these blasted boars have a taste for king's blood. I tell you, come, walk with me. I've a thing or two to say to you in private." He led Ned away, past the columns and out to the courtyard where a light drizzle dampened the stones. Gold cloaks stood watch at every archway. Robert's expression was no longer jovial, replaced by a sternness that reminded Ned of the warrior who had seized the throne by force. "While I was away," Robert said, "I hear there was trouble, an argument between you and the queen about the princess's betrothal to that boy from Highgarden. A small matter, I'm told, but I want to make sure you're not making enemies we can't afford." Ned glanced away, wrestling with how to respond. Perhaps Cersei had spread a different story about the dispute, a smaller lie to obscure the bigger one. "It was a misunderstanding, Your Grace," Ned said carefully. "We have resolved it to the benefit of all parties." Robert grunted. "Women," he said dismissively, "always so protective of their children, always spinning webs we can't see. But I'm glad to hear it's sorted." He laid a heavy hand on Ned's shoulder. "You're my friend, Ned, and I depend on you. I can't have you at odds with the queen. She's, well, you know how she is." Ned merely nodded, unable to offer more. He heard Cersei's voice in his mind, cautioning him that Robert was not to learn the truth. Not yet. He forced a tight smile, wondering how long Robert had left to live if Cersei had her way. She had nearly killed him once already with that incident in the boar hunt. Ned suspected the wine that day had been unusually potent. But perhaps she had rethought her stance, or perhaps she was keeping him alive until Joffrey was truly secure. The days that followed were a surreal charade. Cersei, outwardly cordial, reaffirmed Ned's position as Hand of the King, praising his wisdom in council. Littlefinger watched from the shadows, quick with his sly grin, ever more suspicious of Ned's sudden docility. Varys, the master of whisperers, studied Ned with a quiet curiosity, as though trying to unearth what new secret the Honorable Lord Stark was hiding. Grand Maester Pycelle droned on about trifling matters. Meanwhile, the realm's concerns piled on. The Ironborn were stirring, rumors of a Targaryen girl across the narrow sea lingered, and roving bands of outlaws threatened villages in the Riverlands, likely the early rumblings of something much darker. Yet Ned maintained the facade. In small increments, he ensured Sansa and Arya were guarded, giving them lessons about caution. He spoke to Sansa privately, instructing her, "My sweet girl, the court is not what you think. You must be wary of those who smile at you. Their smiles can be knives." Sansa, though, was lost in her fairy tale illusions of Joffrey as a gallant prince. Joffrey, for his part, behaved as unpredictably as ever. Some days he showered Sansa with awkward praise and gifts. Other days he would snap at her in anger, then quickly try to cover it. Ned, forced to endure this dynamic, prayed it would not end in disaster. For Arya, he arranged lessons not only in the sword forms taught by Syrio Farrell, secretly continuing as best they could, but also lessons on how to navigate courtiers. "Words can cut deeper than swords here in King's Landing," he told her. "You must guard your tongue and your intentions, or they will find a way to use them against you." Arya, frowning, tried to listen. She still hated the city, hated the flowery courtesies, and yearned for the open fields of the north. But she obeyed her father's cautious instructions, especially once she overheard rumors of threats to House Stark if father's conflicts with the Lannisters returned. Ned would sit in council sessions, listening to Baelish's proposals for new loans, Pycelle's meandering discourses on the health of the king, and the clamor from the Riverlands about Gregor Clegane's raids. He recognized that Tywin Lannister was subtly testing the realm's response by unleashing his monstrous retainer upon the countryside. Robert often refused to believe that his wife's family might be behind it, and Ned was left to quell the damage with as few open accusations as possible. Meanwhile, Cersei would lend her support to Ned in carefully measured ways, praising him for maintaining order and providing the crown with stability. The illusions thickened, day by day, and Ned felt himself sinking deeper into complicity. Sansa's excitement for her upcoming wedding to Joffrey grew, though it was tempered by the hush that had fallen over the court. She adored the idea of being queen one day. Eddard could hardly bear to think of the day she would be wed to the boy. He tried to comfort himself with the thought that he might wield some influence over Joffrey, if only to keep the cruelty in check. But Joffrey was a worrisome youth, prone to tantrums and unpredictable malice. Even his mother struggled to control him at times. As the wedding plans moved forward, Ned pulled every string he could to ensure the ceremony would not be rushed. He wanted to buy time, for what exactly he was not certain, time to strengthen alliances, time for Robert to see reason, time for the North to become more prepared. But all the while, Ned knew he was dancing on a thin wire. The day Robert discovered the truth, or the day Joffrey ascended to the throne and no longer needed Ned alive, everything could turn in an instant. Honor demanded action, but the father in him demanded caution. He trained his regrets into a slow-burning determination. There might come a day to rectify this, to speak the truth and dethrone the usurping Lannister brood, but it was not now. It happened that not long after Robert's return, the king's appetite for hunting and carousing returned with a vengeance. He was wont to leave matters of governance to Ned, which only further solidified Ned's position. And when Robert eventually took ill from excessive drinking, his stomach roiling, his face pale, Cersei hovered about him like a concerned wife. Ned saw the carefully measured potions she fed him, and how Robert's clarity began to slip. He suspected that she was dosing him with something mild enough not to kill him outright, but strong enough to keep him dull and pliable. Yet confronting her directly was impossible without evidence. One evening, after Robert fell into a deep, wine-soaked sleep, Cersei held a private gathering in her solar. She invited Ned, along with Littlefinger, Pycelle, and a few Lannister bannermen. The reason, she announced, was to discuss the management of the crown's debts and the upcoming wedding celebrations. Ned arrived late, feeling a twist in his stomach as he considered the spectacle. A subdued gathering, with soft music playing from a corner and flickering lanterns illuminating polished floors. Servants poured wine. Cersei, in a crimson gown, welcomed Ned with a dazzling smile, though her eyes remained calculating. During that meeting, the Queen emphasized again the importance of keeping the realm united, praising Lord Stark for being such a pillar of stability. She talked about the generosity that House Lannister might extend to the north, new trade pacts, funds to bolster the watch along the King's Road, expansions of certain holdings. Ned felt disgusted, but outwardly maintained a calm acceptance. He sipped his wine sparingly, refusing to let the haze of the capital's indulgences dull his senses. From a corner, Littlefinger teased, "Why, Lord Stark, I do believe you found a way to keep the lions purring. I would have never guessed you as the sort to play the game so deftly." Ned cast him a hard look. "One does one's duty, Lord Baelish." Littlefinger only smirked. "Yes, duty. An admirable word that can hide many sins. Still, I congratulate you on your success. The realm does so desperately need peace." Despite the veneer of harmony, Ned couldn't shake the feeling that his every move was being watched by players who understood the treachery at the heart of the matter. He soon excused himself from the gathering, leaving behind the swirl of wine and voices. In his own chambers, he paced the floor, wrestling anew with the direction he had chosen. He remembered telling himself that he would protect his daughters, preserve the peace, and wait for the right moment to act. But each day that moment seemed more distant, as though mired in illusions that might never dissolve. Letters from Winterfell arrived. Catelyn was anxious and concerned about the tension she sensed from rumors in the Riverlands. She wrote of Lannister aggression near the Tullylands, of caravans being harassed, and of Tywin Lannister assembling an unusually large force for exercises. Ned read those words with a sinking heart. Tywin was preparing for a show of strength or possibly war, and the moment might come when House Stark would be forced to choose a side openly. With quiet determination, Ned began to plant seeds of his own. He used his position as hand to direct money toward the City Watch, under the pretense of maintaining order during the wedding festivities, and to quietly replace certain officers with men who might lean toward House Stark or at least remain loyal to the crown as Ned interpreted it. He couldn't trust them all, for Janos Slynt was firmly in Cersei's pocket, but some key positions were filled by men grateful for the promotions Ned arranged. A hidden net of influence was cast. It wasn't as large as he wished, nor as secure, but if the day came where he needed the gold cloaks on his side, at least a fraction might heed him. He also reached out through various channels to check on Stannis. The Lord of Dragonstone remained on his island, sullen and distant from the court. Rumor said he was building ships, fortifying his keep. Some said he was close to forging an alliance with the Red Priestess from Ashai, dabbling in foreign gods. Ned found this talk disturbing, but at least it indicated Stannis was not idle. Perhaps, if Robert died and Joffrey took the throne, Stannis might find cause to challenge him. In that turmoil, Ned could reveal the parentage secret, or at least side with Stannis in some manner. But that still meant civil war. Around this time, a messenger from the Eyrie arrived. Lisa Arryn, Catelyn's sister, wrote a scathing letter accusing the Lannisters of murdering her husband, Jon Arryn, and imploring Ned to bring them to justice. The letter mentioned the boy Robert Arryn, her son, and how she feared for his life. This was the impetus that had once propelled Ned to investigate the truth of Joffrey's parentage in the first place. Now, Ned had to hide his knowledge from Lisa's messenger, offering only vague assurances that the crown was looking into matters. It felt like yet another betrayal, one he tried to justify with the idea that revealing the truth too soon would lead to an unstoppable conflagration. Not long after, King Robert took a turn for the worse. He began coughing up bile in the mornings, complaining of pains in his belly that no maester's draft could soothe for long. Cersei took pains to appear devoted, rarely leaving his side, though Ned noticed how frequently she would pass him a cup of strong wine. Robert's face grew gaunter, his once mighty frame slowly deflating. Though he tried to rally himself for hunts or feasts, each event drained him further. Ned suspected poison, but he had no proof. He was certain Cersei would not kill Robert outright until she was confident Joffrey's power was absolute. But perhaps she was whittling away at him, ensuring he would never again be a true threat. One day, Robert, pale and trembling with fever, summoned Ned to his bedside. "Ned," he said hoarsely, "I'll not be around forever, you know. I wish I'd been a better king. I'm sorry for all the burdens I put on you. So many damned debts, so many troubles. You're my hand, and you have to keep this realm together if something should happen to me." His breath rattled, and for a moment his eyes cleared. "Look after my children," he whispered. "They're all I have. Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen. Keep them safe even if... I know Joff can be difficult, but he's a boy still. Make him a good king, Ned. Promise me." Ned forced himself to nod. "I promise," felt like a dagger twisting in his heart. He wanted to say, "They are not your children," but he only took Robert's hand. "Rest now, your grace." Robert sank back into the pillows, mumbling about how he missed the simpler days of war. He cursed the cruelty of the Lannisters, not seeming to realize he was married to one. Ned left the room with a crushing sense of guilt. Even if Robert never learned the truth, the tragedy of it weighed on Ned's conscience. Not much later, a raven arrived from Castle Black, bearing dire news from Lord Commander Mormont about strange happenings beyond the wall, sightings of White Walkers, and the disappearance of Rangers. That reminded Ned there was a whole other threat that overshadowed the petty Game of Thrones. The realm was unprepared, too busy with its internal squabbles. He wrote a cautious reply, promising to send more men as soon as it was feasible. But what authority did he truly have to raise men for the watch when the Lannisters held the purse strings and the king was half dead from poison or some slow malady? Still, he tried, funneling small amounts of coin to the Night's Watch whenever possible, praying it might make some difference. Time slipped by, and Robert's health declined further. On a day that was supposed to be full of celebration, some official tournament to honor Joffrey's name day, Robert failed to rise from his bed. Maester Pycelle fussed over him, but to no avail. Cersei appeared before the assembled lords with Joffrey at her side, announcing that the king was indisposed and that the duties of ruling would fall on his hand for the time being, with Prince Joffrey standing by to observe. A wave of murmurs ran through the court. Ned kept his face as neutral as he could, even as his gut twisted with foreboding. The tournament itself was a lavish affair, overshadowed by the king's absence. Joffrey presided from the royal box alongside the queen, fidgeting with excitement at the justs. At times, he would laugh cruelly when a rider was unhorsed or injured. Sansa tried to smile but occasionally flinched at Joffrey's more violent humor. Ned observed this dynamic with grim disapproval. Then came the moment when Gregor Clegane nearly killed a lesser knight in the lists, smashing the poor man's chest with a brutal blow. The stands erupted in horror and confusion. Joffrey cheered, while Ned rose to intervene, but the man was already past saving. Sansa was nearly in tears. When Ned demanded an investigation into Clegane's conduct, Cersei overruled him swiftly, claiming it was an unfortunate accident of the joust. Ned realized just how precarious his position was, how easily Cersei could nullify him if she chose. If not for their agreement, he might have had to face her wrath outright. Instead, he bowed his head, letting the matter drop. A wave of revulsion swept through him at the knowledge that he was becoming an accomplice in a realm overshadowed by violence and lies. That night, Joffrey confronted Ned in the corridors of the Red Keep, curious about the letter Sansa had sent to Winterfell describing the tournament. The boy was eager to ensure the letter portrayed him heroically. "You must remind Sansa," Joffrey said, "that she's to sing my praises, not fill my betrothed's family with gloom. She's to speak highly of me, yes." Ned repressed the urge to rebuke the young prince. "Sansa admires you," he said, his tone carefully controlled. "She will write what she sees, your grace. It is not my place to direct her letters." Joffrey's face hardened, and for a moment, Ned saw the man the boy could become: cruel, insecure, and unyielding. He sneered. "Perhaps not, but see that she understands her position. It's the duty of a good betrothed to speak well of her future king." Ned offered a small bow. "Of course, your grace." When Joffrey left, Ned felt a cold sweat on his brow. This was the future that awaited the realm. An impulsive, sadistic boy on the throne, guided by a mother who was cunning enough to direct him to her own advantage. Ned thought of fleeing with Sansa and Arya, but any such flight would brand him a traitor and likely doom them all. As Robert's condition worsened, Ned found a moment alone with the king again. Robert, propped up by pillows, beckoned Ned closer with a trembling hand. "We had some good years, didn't we, Ned? You and I," he rasped. "We drank, we fought, we roared like the old days. Seems a lifetime ago. Feels as though I've been asleep for half my reign." "Your grace," Ned began gently. "No," Robert interrupted. "I won't have you coddle me. I know I've been a poor king, Ned. I should have listened to you more from the start. Not let the Lannisters worm their way in so deep. My father always said, never let a Lannister near your purse strings. I should have heeded him." A ragged cough shook his body. "But it's too late for regrets. Promise me, if anything happens, you'll guard my children." Ned's heart felt leaden. He clasped Robert's hand. "I promise," he said, though the words were weighed down by the knowledge that these children were not Robert's own. Still, in some twisted sense, they were the only family the king believed he had. Robert sank into a delirium soon after. Pycelle spread the word that the king was desperately ill from a mysterious flux. Cersei took command more openly, installing Joffrey at state functions. The boy reveled in the power, giving out petty commands, punishing servants for trivial slights, and boasting that soon he would be the greatest king in the history of Westeros. The court scrambled to appease him, uncertain whether Robert would recover. Ned maintained a posture of dutiful cooperation, but he felt the approaching storm. At last, one morning, Robert died. The bells of the city tolled. Word spread through the streets like wildfire, and the people reacted with sorrow or cynicism, depending on their loyalties. Ned, after a moment of stunned silence, felt the cold grip of inevitability. Cersei wasted no time. She arrayed herself in black and gold, appearing before the Iron Throne with Joffrey, who stood clad in a crimson doublet embroidered with the Lion of Lannister alongside the Stag of Baratheon. The lords gathered in the throne room. Ned was at the forefront, the hand of the king, the man who theoretically should have served as protector of the realm until the rightful heir came of age. But the rightful heir was now contested territory in Ned's mind. Yet he had agreed to the bribe, and he had no illusions. If he declared Joffrey illegitimate here and now, he would be seized, and Sansa and Arya would face lethal consequences. The city might erupt in violence, and war would spill across the realm. He wasn't ready. The North wasn't ready. Cersei's voice rang out. "My lords, I present to you Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, rightful king of the Undulls and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the realm." The High Lords bowed, some with genuine obedience, some with reluctance. Ned bowed as well, though his heart thundered in his chest. He heard mutterings among the lords. Some recognized that Ned had once seemed opposed to the Lannisters, but now he was publicly acknowledging Joffrey. Baelish, from the side, offered a small, knowing smile. Varys looked on with an inscrutable face. Joffrey ascended the Iron Throne with a swagger that belied his youth. As he sat, the light from the windows caught in his golden hair, making it gleam. He gazed across the throne room, that arrogant tilt to his chin. "I am your king," he proclaimed in a voice that cracked at the edges but was laced with malice. "And I expect loyalty. My father, King Robert, is dead, and we mourn him. But now a new age begins, a glorious one. To ensure stability, I reaffirm the betrothal to Sansa Stark. Furthermore, I name my grandfather, Lord Tywin Lannister, as my hand, to serve me in all affairs." The announcement startled Ned. He had not anticipated being replaced so swiftly or so brazenly. Tywin was not even present in King's Landing at the moment, presumably at Casterly Rock. Joffrey continued, "Until my esteemed grandfather arrives, my mother, the Queen Regent, will act in his stead." Ned felt the eyes of the court upon him. He forced a neutral expression. This was part of the agreement, he told himself, acceptance of the new regime. He still held some measure of personal influence, even if not the official title. But his presence here was no longer guaranteed. The power he thought he had as hand evaporated in an instant, replaced by the tenuous security of having House Stark in good graces with the Lannisters. The alternative was open rebellion, which he was not yet prepared to wage. A hush fell, and Cersei then addressed the assembly. "Lord Stark has served my late husband faithfully," she said, "and as a reward for his diligence and loyalty, he shall remain in the King's Council as a royal advisor, as well as Warden of the North." A mixture of relief and indignation swept through Ned. He was being demoted, yet he was spared from disgrace or imprisonment. This was the shape of the compromise he had made. He bowed again. "I am honored to serve." His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. The crowd rustled with speculation, but none dared speak openly. As the weeks passed, King Joffrey settled into a pattern of cruelty tempered by Cersei's guidance. Sansa's wedding was postponed until a more appropriate time of mourning had passed, but her presence was still required at formal events. She did her best to please the king, smoothing his temper with flattery, though more than once Ned glimpsed tears on her face when she thought no one was looking. Arya seethed at the boy's arrogance and avoided him whenever possible. Ned struggled to maneuver within this new order. He attended council meetings chaired by Cersei, with Baelish and Varys present, and with Pycelle drone on about the king's health. Tywin was still absent, apparently finalizing the muster of Lannister forces. Ned learned, through discreet sources, that Tywin was indeed assembling a massive army near Harrenhal. Officially, it was to quell raiders in the Riverlands. In reality, it was an open show of force, a statement that the Lannisters held the greatest military power in the realm under the new king. The other great houses were left to consider their positions carefully. Word arrived from Dragonstone, whispered among the sails in the harbor, that Lord Stannis had declared something ominous, that he was the rightful heir to the throne, though the official announcement was couched in veiled references. Ned knew that if Stannis were to produce evidence of Joffrey's illegitimacy, war would be inevitable. But the proof itself was in Ned's possession, in the genealogies he had discovered. Now that Robert was dead, those genealogies had become Ned's private torment. Should he pass them along to Stannis, or burn them and keep the fragile peace? One morning, Ned was summoned to a private audience with Queen Regent Cersei in her solar. He arrived to find her reading over letters, wearing a black gown embroidered with gold lions, her hair gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. She gestured for him to sit, dismissing her ladies-in-waiting. When they were alone, she began softly, "Lord Stark, I have another task for you. You are aware of the Targaryen girl across the narrow sea. We have received word that she may be gathering supporters, possibly seeking alliances with the Dothraki. Now that King Joffrey reigns, such threats must be dealt with. If the Dragon Princess attempts to cross the sea, we must extinguish her ambitions swiftly." Ned's throat constricted. Once, Robert had tried to have that girl killed, and Ned had objected fiercely. Now, he suspected Cersei's intention was the same. "You wish to send assassins?" he asked, his voice low. Cersei leaned forward, resting her chin on her folded hands. "I wish to preserve the realm. If the Targaryen girl marches with Dothraki, thousands will die, including innocents in the countryside. The king cannot permit such a threat to fester. And you, Lord Stark, are in a position to oversee certain discreet measures." It was another line in the sand. Ned felt his stomach churn. "My queen," he said carefully. "I advised King Robert against such a move. It seemed to me dishonorable to kill a child in a foreign land. She has done us no harm." Cersei's face hardened. "She will, if given the chance. Would you rather a Dothraki horde land on our shores and burn half the realm before we can mount a defense? Do not pretend to be naive, Lord Stark. You know what must be done. If you balk, I will find someone less scrupulous to handle the matter." Ned closed his eyes briefly, recalling the time when he had nearly resigned as hand over this issue. Now he was not even hand, yet still entangled in the same moral quagmire. "I will look into the matter," he finally said, his tone heavy. He did not commit to the act, but nor did he refuse outright. Cersei studied him. "Good. I expect results." Then she changed the subject with startling abruptness. "There is also the matter of your daughters. Arya seems rather restless. I suggest you find a more suitable pastime for her. We wouldn't want her wandering the castle in places she shouldn't be." A chill ran down Ned's spine at the implied threat. "I will see to it," he said curtly. "See that you do," Cersei said. "You have come a long way from the stubborn lord who threatened me with revelations about my children's parentage. I trust we understand each other now." Ned stood. "We do, my queen." He left, feeling the weight of the chains around him. Chains of his own making, forged by his choice to accept her bargain. The following weeks saw King Joffrey increasingly comfortable in his role. He held petty audiences where he dispensed questionable justice, awarding lands or punishing knights on a whim, while Cersei sat behind him, occasionally whispering counsel in his ear. Ned attended as rarely as courtesy allowed, but each time, he felt an urge to intervene when Joffrey's decisions veered toward cruelty. And each time, he bit back his protest, reminding himself he had no power for open defiance. Sansa, meanwhile, was forced to witness these audiences. Sometimes Joffrey made her comment on the punishments, expecting her to praise his wisdom. She did so with trembling lips, her eyes flicking to her father in the vain hope that he might save her from the spectacle. But Ned's hands were tied, and he cursed himself each time for allowing the farce to continue. One day, Janos Slynt and the City Watch uncovered what they described as a conspiracy within the city. A group of men rumored to support Stannis' claim. They dragged a handful of them to the Red Keep, bruised and beaten. Joffrey declared them traitors, ordering they be interrogated for more names. Ned had to watch these men, who were likely only guilty of being rumored to hold a certain view, hauled off to the dungeons. He longed to protest the madness, but that would only draw suspicion upon himself and House Stark. In quiet corners, Ned plotted ways to safeguard his daughters. He considered sending them north with a large enough escort, but the roads were thick with Lannister men, and the invitation from the Queen Regent for them to remain as honored wards left him with little choice. If they disappeared, Joffrey would brand it an act of treason, and war would come swiftly with the Starks at a disadvantage. So they remained. Ned prayed daily that this decision would not doom them. Word arrived that Renly Baratheon had fled the capital for Highgarden, supposedly to broker an alliance with the Tyrells. Ned wasn't sure what Renly's plan was, but it seemed likely Renly aimed to press a claim of his own, or to gather enough strength to negotiate some concession. The realm was fracturing, cracks spreading beneath the surface as each great house angled for advantage. Tywin's mustered army loomed in Harrenhal's shadow, sending a message to any who might challenge the throne. Then came the day that Tywin arrived in King's Landing with a grand procession. Trumpets blared, announcing the arrival of the new hand of the king, father to the Queen Regent, grandfather to Joffrey. Hundreds of Lannister knights, banners streaming in the breeze, paraded through the streets. The people watched with a mixture of awe and dread, well aware that these golden lions meant power and control. Tywin was swiftly escorted to the throne room, where Joffrey awaited him on the Iron Throne. Cersei stood at the king's side. Ned stood among the High Lords in attendance, flanked by Sansa and Arya, who wore formal dresses. Tywin approached the throne with regal confidence, bowed stiffly, and was greeted warmly by his grandson. "Lord Tywin, grandfather," Joffrey proclaimed, "you have served the crown faithfully in your campaigns. Now come, take your rightful place as Hand of the King." Tywin inclined his head and turned to ascend the dais. The whole court looked on as a page placed the hand's pin upon Tywin's cloak. With that, the Lannister hold on power became absolute. Tywin, calm and stoic, accepted the position, with a short speech about loyalty and order, promising to bring justice to the realm. Some among the crowd whispered about the hypocrisy of that promise, given the outrages attributed to the mountain that rides. But none dared speak openly. Ned watched with a stony countenance, recalling how Robert's enthronement had been a revolution against Targaryen tyranny. Now a new tyranny was being born, so it seemed, this one draped in the colors of House Lannister. His only solace lay in the possibility that perhaps, in the future, events would shift in favor of House Stark or some alliance that might break the Lannister hold. But so far, that future was invisible, overshadowed by the lion's might. Arya fidgeted beside him, her face set in a scowl of barely concealed fury. She had come to despise Joffrey openly, no longer hiding her disdain. Ned placed a hand on her shoulder to steady her, aware that if she lashed out, the consequences would be dire. Sansa, though no friend to Joffrey's cruelty, had learned to wear a mask, nodding and smiling when required, tears stinging her eyes in private. Tywin wasted no time establishing his authority. He called a small council meeting that very afternoon, summoning Ned, Cersei, Littlefinger, Varys, and Pycelle. Seated at the head of the table, Tywin exuded quiet menace. "We have multiple threats to address," he said in a measured tone. "Firstly, the pretensions of Stannis Baratheon on Dragonstone. Secondly, Renly Baratheon, who has allied with Highgarden in open defiance of the king. Thirdly, the Targaryen girl across the sea. And last but not least, the outlaws and malcontents who question his grace's birthright." He turned his pale green gaze on Ned. "Lord Stark, you once served as Hand. I trust you have knowledge of how we might proceed with each of these matters." Ned measured his reply carefully. "Lord Tywin, my knowledge is largely from the vantage of King Robert's final months. I can say that Stannis is methodical, and if he plans to move, he will do so with careful preparation. Renly is more impulsive but charismatic. He might rally certain houses to his cause. The Targaryen girl remains overseas, but if rumors are correct that she has Dothraki support, she poses a future threat. Tywin nodded, expression unreadable. We have the largest army in the Seven Kingdoms, and our coffers are well supplied for the moment. Our priority should be to quell domestic threats first. As for the Targaryen, that is a matter we can deal with if and when she attempts to cross the sea. Cersei added softly, Still, I think it unwise to let the dragon girl roam unchecked. If a single assassin can prevent a war, is that not more merciful? She looked at Ned with a faint, knowing smile. Tywin eyed her. We will weigh our options carefully. Killing a Targaryen princess openly could stir sympathies abroad. However, a discreet solution might be best, as the Queen suggests. Ned said nothing, unwilling to further damn himself by endorsing the murder of a girl. Instead, he stared at the table. The conversation moved on to finances, to which Littlefinger contributed elaborate accounts of crown debts and revenues. Varys made mention of new rumors of discontent in the Riverlands, and Tywin assured him that Gregor Clegane and his men would stamp out brigands. The meeting concluded with Tywin assigning tasks: letters to be dispatched, forces to be repositioned, lords to be summoned for negotiations. Ned felt overshadowed in his own city, reduced to a mere participant in a council dominated by Lannisters. Days stretched into weeks. King Joffrey's coronation was planned in a grand fashion, to be held in the Great September of Baelor. Sansa found herself at the center of new attention, as people gossiped about her eventual wedding to the king. Meanwhile, Ned quietly observed the arrival of more and more Lannister bannermen in the capital, while certain lords who might favor the Baratheon brothers or House Stark quietly slipped away. The tension was palpable, though kept under a veneer of royal pageantry. One evening, Arya confronted Ned in his solar. Father, why do we stay here? Why do we let them do these horrible things? Sansa is miserable, and Joffrey is vile. She spoke in a fierce whisper, tears brimming in her eyes. We should go home, or call our banners or something. Ned sat heavily, beckoning her closer. He gently cupped her cheek. Arya, I wish it were so simple. If we flee, we will be branded traitors, and war will come to the north. Thousands of innocents could die, and our family would be among the first. The Lannisters hold too many cards. And even if we called our banners, Tywin Lannister's armies are larger than ours, and we have no certain allies. She shook her head fiercely. But we can't just keep letting them. He silenced her with a gentle hush. We do what we must for now. Trust that I will find a path that protects us. She glared at him, a mixture of hurt and anger. That's not what Mother would want. Ned swallowed hard, thinking of Catelyn and how she would judge his choices if she were here. I know, child, it's not what I want either. But sometimes, he paused, searching for words. Sometimes the cost of doing the right thing at the wrong time is too high. We bide our time for now. Arya's gaze fell to the floor. I hate it, she muttered. He pulled her into a brief hug. So do I, but we do it for our family. Remember that. In the corridor outside, Sansa had been lingering, half listening. She too felt torn. Part of her was relieved that her father wasn't staging a futile fight that might end in their deaths. But another part felt ashamed that they were swallowing so many indignities, letting Joffrey prance about as king. Still, her illusions of a perfect courtly life were shattered, replaced by the reality of a place ruled by fear and cunning. She would weep quietly at night, longing for her mother, for Winterfell's simpler joys. At the coronation ceremony, the High Septon placed a golden crown upon Joffrey's head, pronouncing him the rightful king. Trumpets blared, and the masses cheered in rote duty. Nobles knelt in waves before the Iron Throne. Ned Stark knelt as well, looking up at Joffrey's smug face, and whispered the oath of fealty. He felt hollow, as though the gods themselves had abandoned him. Was this truly the path the old gods and the new demanded of him? Yet he spoke the words. Sansa's hand trembled on his arm as she knelt beside him, tears shining in her eyes. Arya refused to cry, though her face was set in a stony mask of anger. And so Joffrey's reign began in earnest, with Tywin as hand, Cersei as Queen Regent, and Ned Stark as a captive ally in a gilded cage. The North remained distant, but not out of reach. Robb Stark, far away in Winterfell, was receiving carefully worded letters from his father, urging caution, urging that he continue to fortify the region. The words were couched in the language of politeness, referencing the new king's generosity, but Robb sensed the subtext. Be ready, be strong, but do not provoke. Beyond the capital, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to be leading her Dothraki Khalasar. To the south, Renly Baratheon and the Tyrells were forging a new power block. On the sea, Stannis plotted in darkness, perhaps unraveling the secret that Ned had once tried to bring to light. The realm teetered on the edge of a vast conflict, and at the center sat Ned Stark, forced to wear the mask of complicity to preserve his daughters and the slender chance for a better future. He told himself that there would come a time to speak the truth, a time to rally the North and other houses to depose Joffrey if the boy became too monstrous. But every day that passed made that vision seem more distant. The Lannisters fortified their control. The City Watch was firmly under their thumb, and Tywin's army loomed. Tension crept through the capital like a slow poison, and Ned feared that once the storm broke, the entire realm would be soaked in blood. On an autumn day, Ned stood alone on the balcony of the Red Keep, looking out over the city. The sky was streaked with pale clouds. A distant gull cried over Blackwater Bay. He recalled the words of his late friend, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground." That had been Cersei's warning, ironically enough. He had once scoffed at such cynicism, believing in a moral high ground, believing that one could walk away from the game. Now he knew better. He had chosen to play in the name of protecting his family, and he was losing pieces of his soul with each passing day. Yet he would not break. He would not yield entirely. In the quiet corners of his mind, he resolved that if the moment came when his daughters' lives were threatened, or when the realm faced a horror too great to ignore, he would risk everything to set things right. He took a small measure of comfort in that vow. One day, the North might rise, or the truth might out. And on that day, he would do what was necessary, bribe or no bribe, vow or no vow. Perhaps the gods would grant him the chance to atone for the compromise he had made. For now, Eddard Stark remained in King's Landing, the father who sacrificed his own honor to spare his daughters, the man who bowed to a false king to prevent immediate slaughter. It was a choice that haunted him at sunrise and sunset, a choice that would echo through the annals of history in ways that he could not yet foresee. But it was the choice he had made, and he would live with its consequences. He felt the wind from the sea brush against his face, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and fate, as if whispering a promise. Every game must end. Every secret comes to light. And in the end, the price of peace might be paid in blood, no matter how desperately one tried to postpone it. Time did not stop, though. The days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and all the while, Joffrey's personality became more pronounced, his tyranny more overt. Cersei tried to temper him, but only to a degree. The boy reveled in cruelty, especially if it amused the courtiers or reinforced his authority. Executions became public spectacles, and the crowds came to jeer or cower. Ned, watching, felt that every such display was a harbinger of the realm's eventual descent into chaos. Sansa's position grew more precarious. Joffrey alternated between doting on her and lashing out in anger if she dared to show the slightest displeasure. On some days, he would gift her pearls and silks. On others, he would frighten her by commanding a servant to kill a stray cat before her eyes. She grew pale and thin, her sweet illusions shattered. When Ned tried to intervene or speak with Joffrey, Cersei or Tywin would step in, reminding Ned of the bargain he had made. There would be no direct challenge permitted. Arya responded by practicing with Syrio Farrell in secret, though the Braavosi had to be more discreet than ever. Ned suspected that if the Lannisters discovered Arya's training, they would use it as an excuse to punish her. But he allowed the lessons to continue, quietly, because it gave Arya a measure of empowerment that might save her life one day. He prayed she would not do something rash if confronted. Dark rumors reached the city. Stannis had proclaimed Joffrey a bastard born of incest. Those words were not repeated publicly in King's Landing for fear of Lannister reprisal, but they spread nonetheless among the small folk. Ned learned from Varys that Stannis was forging alliances with minor lords in the Stormlands, preparing ships, and entreating the Night's Watch for something. War felt inevitable. Cersei summoned Ned once again, seeking to quell the rumor mill. "Lord Stark," she said, "Stannis Baratheon speaks venom about the king's parentage. We cannot allow these lies to spread. You know the truth of the matter better than most. I want you to publicly denounce Stannis's claims." Ned felt the blood drain from his face. If he publicly spoke, he would be lying before gods and men, proclaiming that Robert was Joffrey's father. But that was the cost of his agreement with Cersei. If he refused, everything he had tried to protect might crumble. He cleared his throat. "If that is your wish, my queen, I will do what I can to discredit Stannis's accusations. However, keep in mind that if we push too hard, we may only give his words more attention. Sometimes ignoring rumors is more effective." Cersei gave him a thin smile. "I appreciate your caution, Lord Stark, but the boy is king. He must not be seen as weak or illegitimate. The people must see that your house, a great northern house, stands firmly behind him. You will draft a declaration denouncing Stannis as a usurper, reaffirming Joffrey's rightful claim. I will ensure it is read throughout the city, then dispatched to every corner of the realm." "Very well," Ned said, his voice almost lifeless. Each new lie felt like a fresh wound. But he told himself again. Sansa and Arya must be protected. The North must be given time, and the realm must not be plunged into immediate war. He drafted the statement. It pained him to put his seal upon it. He could almost feel the eyes of his dead kin judging him, Brandon and Rickard, even Lyanna, from beyond the grave. The words were posted publicly, read in the squares, and circulated among the lords. Many who heard it might sense the hollowness of the declaration. Others would believe it wholeheartedly. Regardless, it gave the Lannisters another cloak of legitimacy. That winter, though mild in King's Landing, brought a growing chill to Ned's heart. The war that loomed outside the city stirred dread in every corner. Renly was rumored to be gathering Tyrell might. Stannis was building ships. The North was quiet, but not asleep. Robb Stark was rumored to be rallying bannermen, citing hostilities in the Riverlands. Tywin's eyes were everywhere. The roads in and out of the city were watched. One cold evening, Ned knelt in the godswood of the Red Keep, beside the ancient weirwood, his face carved in silent witness. He placed his palm against the trunk, longing for the old gods of the North. "I have done what I thought necessary," he whispered, voice trembling. "Have I damned my soul for no good reason? Have I only delayed an inevitable war?" The heart tree stared back, unchanging, unmoving. He wondered if the old gods had turned away from him, if he was alone in this labyrinth of lies. Yet, in that silence, he felt a faint stirring within. Something like the memory of the quiet wind in the Wolfswood far to the north, the hush of snowfall in Winterfell's courtyard. He remembered that, as a boy, he had prayed here in King's Landing before the end, before his father was executed by the Mad King. The city had always been a place of doom for his family. Now, it seemed the cycle continued, but perhaps he could break it somehow. Perhaps, by surviving a little longer, he could shape events so that the end would not be as tragic. He rose and returned to his chambers, determination renewed. He would continue to play this dangerous game. He would appear loyal to the false king, while quietly preserving every advantage he could. He would watch for the moment when an alliance might be made with some or all of the other claimants to overthrow the Lannisters. He would keep Sansa and Arya safe, no matter the personal cost. If the opportunity arose to remove Joffrey from the throne without dooming the realm, he would seize it. So the days turned into nights, the nights into days, the cycle unrelenting. Joffrey's court became the stage for petty cruelties, masquerading as royal judgments. Tywin orchestrated broader strategies, forging pacts with certain lords, crushing others with gold or steel. Cersei reigned behind the scenes, cunning as ever. Sansa walked the line between compliance and heartbreak. Arya seethed with impatience, and Ned Stark wore a mask of acquiescence that left him hollow inside. But inside that hollowness, a spark waited, an ember of northern resilience that might one day burst into flames of retribution. Because Eddard Stark had taken Cersei Lannister's bribe to save himself, to save his family, to preserve a fragile peace. But neither he nor the realm was truly saved. The choice had only postponed the reckoning, ensuring that when it finally came, it would come with a fury all the greater for the time spent simmering in shadows. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city's torches burned low, Ned lay awake thinking of that moment, unsure whether he would find redemption or damnation when the final day of judgment arrived. He only knew that he would face it with the same resolve he had faced all things, as a Stark of Winterfell, father to Sansa and Arya, a man who had weighed his honor against their lives, and chosen as a father must. If the gods were just, they would one day understand. If not, he would bear that burden until his dying breath. Eddard Stark stood at his window, the moonlight spilling across the stones of his chamber in the Red Keep. The hour was late, but he found no rest behind his closed eyes. Each day's end brought a fresh burden to his conscience. Outside, the faint glow of torches lined the castle walls, where gold cloaks patrolled beneath the watchful banners of House Lannister. Beyond the Red Keep, the city of King's Landing sprawled, an uneasy mass haunted by rumor and anxiety. Tywin Lannister was now the hand of the king, and Joffrey, the false heir, sat the Iron Throne. Ned had never felt more powerless, despite holding a seat on the small council and still bearing his ancient title as Warden of the North. He touched the pommel of the sword he kept at his side now, a lesser blade than ice. Ice was back in Winterfell for safekeeping. This sword felt foreign in his grasp, as though an ill fit for the honorable justice he used to mete out. The man he had been in the North felt distant, almost unreal, like a dream from which he could not fully awaken. Ever since accepting Cersei's bribe, since deciding to bury the truth of Joffrey's parentage, Ned had walked through each day with the uneasy sense that he had forsaken a part of himself. And yet, he told himself for the 1000th time, he had done it for Sansa, for Arya, for the hope of keeping the North intact. He gave up trying to sleep. Donning a cloak, he slipped through the corridors of the Red Keep until he reached the godswood once again. The weirwood's face glimmered white under the moon. He knelt in silent prayer. This time, he did not ask the old gods for guidance he knew they would not give. Instead, he asked for strength, the strength to endure the burdens he had taken upon himself. When he rose to leave, he noticed a figure in the shadows. Arya, clad in a night robe, was perched on a low stone bench at the edge of the moonlit clearing. She had her knees tucked against her chest. Even in the dim light, Ned could see the set of her jaw, the stubborn defiance in her eyes. He went to her quietly, lowering his voice so no guards might overhear. "What are you doing out of bed?" he asked, placing a fatherly hand on her shoulder. She shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. I was thinking about home." He tried to smile, but the motion failed halfway. "So was I," he said. "What do you remember most, child?" Arya picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "The quiet, the sound of the wind in the high towers, the smell of pine and snow. Here, it's always so loud, and the air tastes like rot." She paused, a flicker of sorrow crossing her face. "Father, does it have to be this way? Being forced to bow and scrape before Joffrey?" She spoke the name with scorn. "I want to go back north." Ned gazed at her, seeing the traces of the little girl she still was, and the woman she might someday become. "I know," he said softly. "If it were up to me, we would be on the King's Road tomorrow. But it's not so simple." She was quiet for a moment, chewing her lip the way Catelyn would scold her for. "He's horrible," she muttered. "I hate him. I hate the Lannisters." Ned knew better than to dismiss her feelings. "You must be careful never to say that where ears might carry it," he cautioned. "We're alone now, but the walls in this castle have a way of listening." He took a breath. "Arya, if I could send you away from here, I would. But running now would only provoke them. They could brand us traitors, move against the North. You understand?" She nodded, sullen, her gray eyes dark as slate. "I understand. But that doesn't mean I have to like it." He pulled her into a small, awkward embrace, hoping to offer reassurance. "Remember, child, we must endure for a time. One day, if the gods are just, we'll find a chance to do what's right." She breathed against his chest, arms tense. Then she nodded and drew back, her young face determined. "I'll wait then, but I won't forget, Father. Someday he'll pay for what he's done, what he's doing." Ned nodded, a flicker of sorrow in his eyes. "Let's hope we find a better way than open bloodshed in the Red Keep. Now, back to bed with you before the guards start questioning why you're out." Together, they moved quietly through the corridors until Arya slipped back to her room. Ned lingered outside her door, listening until he heard the rustle of sheets. His heart felt torn in two. Arya's fury was the pure indignation of youth. But was it so wrong? The realm itself seemed to cry out against the injustice that had set this Lannister boy upon the throne. Yet Ned's oath to protect his children held him fast, as tightly as any chain. He returned to his own chamber and finally found enough weariness in his bones to succumb to a restless sleep. Come morning, Ned forced himself into the routine of council meetings and royal audiences. Tywin Lannister had wasted no time tightening the crown's fiscal belt, calling in loans that had been scattered across the realm. Baelish Littlefinger professed to be indispensable, forging new lines of credit with the Iron Bank of Bravos and a dozen other foreign lenders. In truth, Ned suspected half those lines were illusions or gambles that could turn to dust if the war came. But Tywin seemed satisfied enough, so long as the gold kept flowing. War was expensive, and every sign pointed to war. On the dais in the throne room, King Joffrey and his mother, the Queen Regent, held audience with highborn visitors who had braved the roads to King's Landing. Most came to profess loyalty, whether genuine or out of fear. A few sought boons, lands, titles, justice for old feuds. Joffrey dispensed decisions with the impulsiveness of youth. When a petitioner annoyed him, he would snap at them to be silent or threaten them with his newly appointed Kingsguard. That included the Hound and the towering Ser Maren Trant, among others loyal to Lannister gold. Ned watched from below, forced to maintain an expression of dutiful calm. He noticed Sansa, standing to one side in a gown of pale blue and white, her hair intricately braided. She looked the image of a sweet, shy, noble girl, but he could see tension in her posture. When the day's audiences ended, Joffrey leapt down the steps of the throne with a bored scowl. Sansa curtsied, offering a demure smile. The king seemed momentarily pleased by her submission, though he quickly snapped his fingers for a servant to bring him wine. Ned took the chance to step closer. "Sansa," he said quietly, "remember to keep your head high. Show them you are strong." She looked up, her eyes haunted by a subdued sadness. "Yes, father," she said, offering no more. A year ago, she might have told him about her daydreams of being a great queen beloved by all. Now that innocence had eroded. She knew her betrothed was vain and cruel. He had done enough already to prove that, but she was caught in a gilded snare, just like her father. Ned guided her away from the throne room. He considered, for a fleeting moment, whether to speak openly with her about the bargain he had struck. But no, Sansa was too gentle, too trusting. If she let something slip, it would be disastrous. She had to remain ignorant of the deeper truths. It pained him, but secrets were weapons in King's Landing, and he would not hand a blade to the Lannisters by accident. As they crossed the marble floors beneath the vaulted ceilings, they nearly collided with Peter Baelish. Littlefinger dipped his head in a mocking half-bow. "My Lord Stark, lovely to see you escorting your charming daughter." Ned bristled, forcing civility. "Lord Baelish." Sansa offered a polite curtsy. "Lord Baelish," she said, her tone neutral. Peter smirked. "I was just heading to meet the Queen Regent. She's anxious about certain shipments from the Vale, you see. Delicate matters of coin." He eyed Sansa for a moment. "My lady, you grow lovelier by the day. The court must be enchanted." Sansa forced a small smile. "Thank you, my lord." Ned nodded curtly. "We should be on our way." He guided Sansa onward, away from the master of coin. Every time Ned encountered Baelish, he felt a sickly sense of unease. The man was a chameleon, cunning beyond measure. Ned suspected that he might already guess why the Honorable Lord Stark had yielded to the Lannisters, or that at least Peter had deduced bits and pieces. But so far, Baelish had not tried to confront him with it. He was content to watch from the shadows and see which way the winds might blow. They parted ways at Sansa's chamber door, where Septa Mordane greeted them with a fretful bob of her head. Ned left his daughter in the Septa's care, with instructions to rest. He offered a reassuring nod, though it did little to soothe the lingering anxiety in Sansa's eyes. Back in the small council chamber, Tywin and Cersei were seated together, reviewing missives. Varys stood off to the side, silent and watchful. Pycelle dozed in a tall chair, occasionally waking to mumble something about the king's health. When Ned entered, Tywin glanced up. "Lord Stark," Tywin said, his voice resonant. "We have news from the Riverlands. A large band of outlaws has been harrying settlements north of Harrenhal. Gregor Clegane is leading our response. The situation, however, remains volatile." Ned's jaw tightened. He recalled how the mountain had terrorized the region once before, setting the seeds of conflict that helped spark the War of the Five Kings in another timeline. Here, in this altered scenario, those seeds were still there, only overshadowed by Ned's choice. "Is there any word on whether these outlaws are in league with Stannis or Renly?" "Not conclusively," Cersei answered, "though we do know Lord Beric Dondarrion was reported active in those parts." Ned remembered Beric Dondarrion, a man dispatched by Robert's court once, to bring the mountain to justice. In that previous event, Ned had himself given the command. Now the tables were turned. Tywin's flick of an eye indicated that any talk of justice would be handled in the Lannister way. "Has Beric attacked Lannister men?" Ned asked carefully. Tywin's nostrils flared slightly. "All that matters is that he and his band are inciting rebellion by interfering with the king's peace. If we do not crush it swiftly, others might be emboldened." Ned recognized how Tywin masked cruelty with the language of order. "What of the small folk caught in the crossfire?" he asked, though he expected a cold answer. Cersei's lips tightened. "Their loyalty should be to the crown. If they get in the way, it is their misfortune." Varys cleared his throat softly. "We must be mindful, my lord, my lady, that heavy-handed tactics can breed resentment. The Riverlands are still uncertain in their loyalties. If we burn too many villages—" Tywin's gaze swung to the spymaster. "We will do what must be done. I will not have roving bands of rebels undermining King Joffrey's rule. Gregor Clegane understands his orders." Then, to Ned, he said, "Lord Stark, you might relay any insight you have into the loyalties of those river lords. Your wife's family, the Tullis, are at Riverrun. They have yet to declare fully for the crown, though they have not opposed us directly." Ned's heart twitched at the mention of Catelyn, the Tullis. She was still in the north, or traveling between Winterfell and Riverrun to see to family matters. Their messages were carefully worded. "As far as I know, the Tullis remain concerned with the raids. They blame outlaws, not necessarily the Lannisters." He lied. Some of Catelyn's letters had spoken plainly of suspicions. "I can write to them, remind them that the king will protect them so long as they abide by his laws." "Do so," Tywin said. "The time for them to make a choice draws near. If they bend the knee publicly, we can incorporate their forces into our own. If not, well..." He let the words hang in the still air. Pycelle stirred, blinking. Yes, the Tullis must come to heel. No more rebellious talk from the Riverlands. The king's word is law." Cersei leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers on the table. "See it done, Lord Stark. The Tullis have sat on the fence long enough." Ned nodded, though in his chest a smoldering anger built. The Tullis had not truly rebelled. They were uncertain because they sensed the Lannister grip tightening around the realm like a mailed fist. He forced the anger down, reminding himself of the precarious balance that kept Sansa and Arya alive. "I will send a raven today," he said. With that, the council turned to other matters. Baelish arrived in the midst of discussion about a new levy of taxes on trade goods. He presented figures that would raise coin for the crown, glancing sidelong at Ned as though daring him to protest. Ned offered only a minimal nod of acknowledgement. Tywin, satisfied, scrawled a signature on the parchment. King Joffrey, of course, was not present for such tedium. That was left to the adults in the room. When the meeting adjourned, Cersei touched Ned's arm lightly, halting him as the others filed out. The touch was cool, and she wore a carefully measured smile. "Walk with me, Lord Stark," she said. "We have matters to discuss in private." He inclined his head, bracing himself. They moved through the corridors until they reached a small courtyard, open to the sky. Cersei dismissed her guards, though Ned knew well enough that her watchers were never far. They strolled along the edge of a fountain, the water trickling softly. "You've done well maintaining your stance," Cersei said eventually. "The realm believes your loyalty to Joffrey is genuine." Ned's throat felt dry. "I do what I must, my queen. And you will continue to do so," she said, pausing beside a marble bench. She turned to face him, her green eyes bright under the sun. "You understand that if Stannis or Renly manage to build a coalition against us, we will respond with the full might of the Lannister armies. We will not tolerate any house that breaks faith. The Tullys, the Arryns, even your son in the north, they must remain loyal. If they do not, we will crush them, and you will not be able to stop it." A wave of cold passed through Ned. "I am aware," he said, "and I have counseled caution to the north. Robb is young, but not foolish." Cersei tilted her head. "I have no desire for bloodshed with the Starks. The north is far away and difficult to subdue. But if pressed, House Lannister will bring war even to the snows. We need not come to that so long as you uphold our deal." Ned swallowed, remembering the day she had cornered him with her proposition. He had yielded. The knowledge still tasted of ash. "I do as I have pledged," he said quietly. She studied him, as if searching for any hint of rebellion. "Good. Then continue to remind your son where his duties lie. We want no misunderstandings." He almost retorted that the Lannisters were the only ones sowing misunderstandings. Instead, he kept his face a mask. "If that is all, my queen?" Her smile was a small, triumphant thing. "Yes," she said. "That is all. You are dismissed." She turned and walked away, the rustle of her gown echoing in the courtyard. Ned remained behind for a moment, fists clenched at his sides. How had it come to this that he was taking orders from the woman he once threatened with the truth? But he knew the answer. They had Sansa, they had Arya. They had King's Landing, they had the throne. They had the might of Tywin's armies, and though the north was large, it was also distant, scattered, and unprepared for a swift southern invasion. This was the bed he had made for himself, and so he lay in it. Over the next weeks, ravens crisscrossed the skies. Ned corresponded with Robb, choosing his words carefully. He conveyed the sense that House Stark must tread lightly, offering no open challenge to the crown, while still urging vigilance in case the realm slid into open warfare. Through separate letters, he asked Catelyn to keep an eye on the Rivellins, to sense the Tully inclination, all couched in language that would raise no suspicion if the Lannisters intercepted the missives. He did not mention Joffrey's parentage, nor anything about the bribe, or the deeper conspiracies in King's Landing. Such secrets he held close, weighed down by the knowledge that if discovered, they could bring the entire might of House Lannister crashing upon his family. The tension frayed his nerves day by day. Arya and Sansa were the only bright points that reminded him why he endured. Sansa still spent her days learning courtly skills from Septa Mordane and from older ladies of the court. She was thrust increasingly into the role of a future queen, asked to accompany Joffrey at feasts or ceremonies. Joffrey's moods were mercurial. Sometimes he flattered her, calling her beautiful. Other times, he sneered about the north and ridiculed her father in subtle jabs, testing how far he could push. Sansa would attempt to keep a brave face, but her tears often found her in private. Arya, for her part, grew more adept at avoiding unwanted attention. She slipped away to meet Syrio Farrell for lessons, sometimes in unused corridors, sometimes in the Godswood. She had become quieter, less prone to outbursts, channeling her frustration into the dance of her wooden sword. Still, Ned could see the storm in her eyes whenever Joffrey passed by with his retinue. He prayed she would not lose her temper if provoked. One afternoon, as Ned was leaving the council chamber, Littlefinger sidled up to him. "Lord Stark," he said, voice smooth as silk, "it occurs to me that you might be in need of certain information. Varys is not the only one with little birds, you know." Ned frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean." Baelish wagged a finger as though scolding. "Oh, come now. You're no fool, even if you play the part from time to time. The realm is on a knife's edge, and you are curiously quiet of late. If you wish to know what certain Baratheons are plotting beyond our walls, or what certain Sellswords might be planning across the narrow sea, or how the small folk whisper in Flea Bottom, I could provide insight." Ned knew better than to trust Peter Baelish. "And what would you want in return?" Littlefinger's smile never wavered. "Merely a small courtesy. Keep me apprised of your own interesting perspectives. We are both advisors to the king, are we not? If war comes, better for the realm's wise men to stand together than to be parted." Yes. Ned was certain that Baelish wanted leverage, or at least a foothold in Ned's confidence. "I appreciate the offer," he said blandly, "but I'm sure you understand I have to be careful about whom I share counsel with." "Of course," Baelish said, "and I too must be careful. Still, should you change your mind, you know where to find me. The city is large, and many shadows gather in it. One never knows what they might hear in the right corner." With that, he offered a mocking bow and vanished down the corridor. Ned shook his head, unsettled. Baelish was an eel. Slippery, ambitious, never fully aligned with anyone but himself. Ned suspected he might have his own designs on Sansa, or on chaos itself, which he could exploit to gain power. The man was dangerous. Yet in this viper's nest, might a dangerous ally be better than no ally at all? Ned considered it, then thought of how Baelish had once betrayed him in another life. He could not trust Peter, no matter how desperate he became. More lords arrived in the capital, each seeking the favor of King Joffrey. Some were genuine Lannister supporters. Minor Western lords, knights hoping for patronage, opportunists who saw the writing on the wall. Others were more uncertain, quietly weighing if it might be safer to align with Stannis or Renly. Tension crackled like lightning. The Red Keep bustled with lavish feasts to showcase Joffrey's magnanimity. Though behind the scenes, Tywin's men kept watch for any sign of treachery. On one such feast night, Ned found himself at a high table with other council members and a handful of visiting lords from the Crownlands. The hall echoed with the laughter of courtiers and the clatter of dishes. Musicians played lively tunes, and the scent of roasted boar and spiced wine filled the air. Joffrey sat enthroned at the head of the table, with Sansa at his side, wearing a soft pink gown that contrasted painfully with her downcast demeanor. Midway through the feast, Joffrey ordered entertainment. A group of jugglers stepped forward, hurling brightly colored balls in intricate patterns. The king clapped his hands in delight when one juggler balanced a spinning plate on the tip of a sword. Sansa forced a polite smile. Then Joffrey waved the performers aside and demanded a demonstration of swordsmanship from two of his knights. Ser Meryn Trant and another Kingsguard performed a brief exhibition, clanging steel in half-hearted strokes meant to dazzle but not truly injure. Ned looked away, reaching for his cup. No matter how often he watched, every show of force in Joffrey's name made his stomach churn. Suddenly, Joffrey's sharp voice rang out. "Lord Stark," the boy called. "Come. Show us how a Northman wields a blade." Ned froze, glancing up at the dais. Joffrey was grinning mischievously, gesturing with his goblet. "Go on. See if you can best my men in a friendly contest." Laughter rippled across the room. To many, it was all in good sport, but Ned felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him, and Cersei's cool gaze from behind her son. He stood slowly, forcing a mild grin. "Your grace flatters me, but my sword hand is not what it once was." Joffrey snorted. "Bah, you're not so old. Don't be cowardly. Grab a sword, unless the wolf of the north has grown tame in our city." He heard a few titters and felt the heat rise in his neck. He could not refuse openly. It would be seen as a coward's retreat. Yet beating a Kingsguard in front of the court might provoke Joffrey's wrath. In this twisted situation, even a demonstration was fraught with peril. But to meekly back down was unthinkable. Ned offered a courteous bow. "If it pleases the king." He approached the middle of the hall, where the two knights stood uncertainly. Servants brought Ned a long sword. It was lighter than ice, and the balance felt strange, but at least it was a real blade and not a flimsy tourney sword. Ser Meryn Trant sized him up, plate armor gleaming in the torchlight. "Shall we, Lord Stark?" he said, not unkindly, but with the arrogance of a knight who believed he could best a man older and less practiced of late. Ned inhaled, trying to ignore the hush that fell over the hall. In Winterfell's yard, he had sparred many times, but seldom for the entertainment of a mocking crowd. He loosened his shoulders. "Let's be quick about it," he said quietly. Ser Meryn stepped forward, blade raised. They circled each other in the open space cleared by the watchers. Ned heard the anxious whispers from the nobles, the hush of Sansa's breath from the dais. He steadied himself, calling on reflexes honed over years. Meryn lunged. Ned sidestepped, deflecting the blow with a clang of steel. Another strike, another parry. Meryn was strong, but not particularly cunning. To keep the match short, Ned feigned a high slash, then pivoted with surprising agility and disarmed Meryn with a flick of his wrist, sending the Kingsguard's sword clattering across the floor. A collective gasp sounded from the onlookers. Ned's breath came faster, but he kept his blade pointed away, not wanting to humiliate the knight too greatly. Joffrey's voice rang out. "Ha! The old wolf still has teeth." He laughed, though there was a brittle edge to it. He did not enjoy seeing his Kingsguard bested so effortlessly. Ned lowered his sword, turning to bow to the king. "Your grace," he said, not quite meeting Joffrey's eyes. Sansa, from the dais, allowed a small, proud smile to creep onto her face before concealing it. Then Joffrey signaled for the music to resume, and the tension dissipated. Ser Meryn retrieved his sword, red-faced but maintaining his stoicism. Ned could feel the waves of animosity rolling off the man. Kingsguards did not like to be embarrassed in front of the entire court. Ned slipped back to his seat, ignoring the handful of congratulatory murmurs. Tywin watched him with a cool expression. Cersei offered a tight, unreadable smile. The feast continued, but the atmosphere felt subtly altered, as though a hidden message had just played out. Joffrey had tested Ned's willingness to comply, and whether he might still hold some measure of skill or defiance. The result, ironically, was that Ned had proven he was still dangerous in his own right. That knowledge would not sit easily with the Lannisters. When the feast ended, Ned slipped away before more trouble could brew. Outside the hall, Sansa caught up to him, accompanied by two of her handmaidens. She spoke softly, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Father, I was so scared for you." He mustered a small smile. "A simple spar, that's all." But his heart still thumped. "Go to your chambers, rest." Sansa glanced at the hall's doors, from where Joffrey's voice could still be heard, bragging about how he had let Ned best his night on purpose. She frowned. "Yes, father," she said, then curtsied and departed with her companions. Ned watched her go, feeling a surge of love for this daughter who tried so hard to adapt to a vicious court. He prayed he had not worsened their precarious situation by winning the spar. Still, a quiet part of him burned with satisfaction that at least once he had shown them he was not a broken old wolf. If only it mattered in the grand scheme. In the days that followed, tensions outside the city escalated. Scouts reported that Renly Baratheon had proclaimed himself the rightful king with the backing of the Tyrells in Highgarden, forging a formidable alliance that gave him numbers and wealth. Meanwhile, Stannis remained at Dragonstone, building ships and gathering sellswords from Essos. The realm braced for a war of 3 claimants, ignoring the fact that a silent 4th claim might yet belong to a Targaryen girl across the sea. Every corner of Westeros hummed with the possibility of upheaval. Tywin ordered half his army to march to the Reach, hoping to prevent the Tyrell host from uniting with Renly's new allies in the Stormlands. Another portion of the Lannister force remained near Harrenhal, on watch for any incursion from Riverrun or the Vale. The strategic board was set. Ned recognized, from the vantage of the small council, that the Lannisters intended to fight multiple fronts if needed, confident in their gold and discipline. Yet a prickle of doubt slid through him. Westeros was vast, and no single house could hold it by mere force if enough lords rebelled at once. Still, the question of the North persisted. Tywin demanded updates almost daily. "Lord Stark," he'd say in that implacable tone, "when will the North send its sworn sword south to prove its loyalty to King Joffrey?" Ned deflected with half-truths. "My lord, the North is a harsh land. It takes time for bannermen to gather, especially with winter storms along the neck. Robb is mustering men, but travel is slow." Tywin's mouth tightened. "I expect that muster to begin moving soon. A demonstration of your family's fealty would do much to quiet any rumors of disloyalty." Ned could only dip his head, feeling the noose tighten. He wrote to Robb, advising him to prepare a token force for movement, but not to commit wholeheartedly. The delicate balance continued. Appear loyal enough to keep the Lannisters at bay, but avoid a situation where the entire North might be pinned down in a fruitless war on Joffrey's behalf. Meanwhile, Ned prayed that winter storms or the sheer distance might buy them time. As if the stress of looming war were not enough, Cersei continued to press Ned about the Targaryen girl. Reports claimed she was still across the narrow sea, forging alliances with a city-state or traveling with a Dothraki Khalasar. Little tangible threat had emerged yet. Nevertheless, the queen wanted her dead. "We cannot allow that spark of rebellion to ignite," she told Ned in private, more than once. "If she lands with a Dothraki horde, thousands will die. Better to snuff her out now." Ned argued that the Dothraki had never crossed the sea in force, and that the princess lacked the ships or funding to mount an invasion. Cersei dismissed him as naive. "I recall how your friend, King Robert, was adamant that the last Targaryens must be destroyed. He was right in that, if nothing else." She pressed him to fund assassins or bribe local lords in Essos to do the deed. Ned made half-promises, stalling. He had no stomach for the murder of a girl halfway across the world. Still, each day's delays risked angering Cersei. Ned could see in her eyes a glint of suspicion. Was he truly loyal, or was he merely biding his time? So he feigned progress, writing letters to contacts in Pentos or Myr, though he avoided finalizing any real assassination plot. If it came to that, he doubted he could bring himself to sign off on such a thing. Another moral compromise piled atop the ones he had already made. One evening, a hush fell over King's Landing as news arrived that a massive Tyrell host had moved toward Storm's End, supporting Renly Baratheon's claim. Meanwhile, the royal forces commanded by Tywin's bannermen had skirmished with some of Renly's outriders near the Mander, with inconclusive results. The city's mood darkened, and many gold cloaks wondered if they would soon be shipped off to fight. Food prices rose. Whispers abounded that the king's rule was threatened. Joffrey seized on the tension to further demonstrate his authority. He ordered a public show of strength in the courtyard of the Red Keep, a grand formation of the city watch, an inspection of the king's guard, and a speech praising his own vigor. Sansa and Cersei were there in official capacity, with Ned among the other lords. Arya, forced to attend, stood near her father with folded arms and a barely contained scowl. When Joffrey finished his self-glorifying speech, he dismounted from the dais and surveyed the ranks of gold cloaks. A few unfortunate men who had tarnished armor or shabby uniforms were called forward and berated in front of all. Joffrey demanded they kneel while he proclaimed that the city watch must be the finest force in the realm under his reign. The men stammered apologies. Ned felt revulsion at the spectacle, but he kept his face impassive. Afterwards, as Joffrey strutted away with his retinue, Tywin motioned for Ned to walk with him. They exited the courtyard and entered a corridor leading to the Tower of the Hand, now Tywin's seat of office. Guards stood watch at the door, saluting as Tywin and Ned passed. Inside, the rooms had been refurnished in the Lannister style. Red drapes, golden lion sigils on the walls, plush carpets from Myr. A stark contrast to the simpler decorations Ned once had during his brief time as Hand. Tywin gestured to a table spread with maps. "We have new intelligence on the Baratheon brothers," he said. "Renly consolidates power in the Reach, while Stannis is rumored to be forging alliances with Lys and Pentos for ships. If both men make their moves simultaneously, the Crown will be forced to split its forces." He looked at Ned. "We must be ready." Ned nodded. "Yes, my lord." Tywin's sharp gaze flicked over him. "I have not yet received any word on the northern levy departing Winterfell. Has your son delayed?" Ned forced a neutral expression. "The roads have been challenging, Lord Tywin, but the men should be moving soon, if they have not already. Then we shall expect them. The king desires a show of loyalty from the Starks, and so do I. When your banners arrive, they will be placed under capable Lannister commanders and integrated into the host that will march against Renly or Stannis." Ned's stomach twisted. He could imagine the fury in Robb's heart if he and his men were forced to fight under Lannister command. But what could he do? "I will send another raven urging haste," he said hollowly. Tywin grunted in approval. He tapped a finger on the map where the trident forked. "House Frey sits astride the crossing at the Twins. They have not declared for anyone yet. If the North tries to move south, they will need Walder Frey's permission. Make certain your son secures it quickly." Ned knew Walder Frey's reputation. Cunning, opportunistic, untrustworthy. The old man would likely demand humiliating concessions. Another worry to add to the pile. "I will advise him," Ned said. Tywin studied Ned for a long moment. "You are not a fool, Stark. I know it must grate on you to serve a king you once suspected. But we all have our parts to play, for the good of the realm. War is upon us. You stand with the Lannisters now, or you stand against us." His voice was icy. Ned met Tywin's eyes, forcing the weight of his convictions to the background. "I stand with the realm," he said quietly. "And as you hold the throne, so be it." Tywin inclined his head, though something in his gaze suggested he saw deeper. "That will be all." Ned took his leave, stepping out into the corridor. The conversation left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had never willingly marched under the banner of House Lannister. This alliance was unholy, forged in blackmail and the threat to his daughters' lives. Each day, the demands grew heavier. Sooner or later, Tywin would notice that the North was not truly sending a large force, or that Ned's compliance was half-hearted. And then, but for now, he managed to stave off confrontation, walking that razor's edge. If only war could be averted altogether, if only Stannis or Renly would find a way to depose Joffrey without turning King's Landing into a battlefield. Yet Ned doubted any such clean solution existed. Meanwhile, within the keep's labyrinth of corridors, rumors about Daenerys Targaryen grew louder. She was said to be in Karth now, a distant city of wonder, possibly receiving support from wealthy traders. Others insisted she remained with Dothraki blood riders, amassing a fearsome horde. Each rumor conflicted with the next, but they all painted a picture of a Targaryen who was not idle. Cersei's demands for her elimination grew more urgent, and Ned continued to stall. One afternoon, Varys approached Ned discreetly in a gallery overlooking Blackwater Bay. The eunuch's footsteps were soft as a cat's. "Lord Stark," he said in that smooth, unassuming voice, "might I have a word?" Ned, who had been watching a line of supply ships glide into port, gave a curt nod. "Lord Varys." The spider pressed his hands together, inclining his head. "I bring tidings of the Targaryen princess. Word from my little birds suggests she has hatched. Improbable creatures." Ned's brow furrowed. "Hatched what?" "Dragons." Varys's whisper fell like a stone in the silence. "3 of them. The details are murky, but it seems she walked into a funeral pyre for her husband, Khal Drogo, and emerged unburnt, dragons clinging to her shoulders. He paused, allowing the enormity of it to sink in. Ned felt a tremor run through him. Dragons, the beasts that had forged the 7 kingdoms in fire and blood centuries ago. That can't be, he said, though he knew better than to dismiss anything Varys said outright. I am merely relaying what I've heard. Tales from across the sea can be exaggerated, but there are enough consistent accounts that I fear it might be true. Varys studied Ned's face. If so, the princess wields a weapon not seen in Westeros for a long age. Ned exhaled slowly, dread coiling in his gut. If that's true, Cersei will stop at nothing to kill her. Varys nodded. Indeed, and that is where the realm's moral question arises. Dragons are a threat to the Lannisters, but also, in time, perhaps to all of Westeros if she chooses to reclaim her father's throne. The Targaryen madness is no small thing. Then again, if the realm is to be rid of the Lannisters' tyranny, some might hope for a Targaryen restoration. Ned frowned. I have no love for House Targaryen. My father and brother died at the Mad King's hands. His voice grew taut. Yet the murder of a young girl never sat well with me. If these dragons are real, it changes the game. She won't be so easily slain. Precisely, Varys said. It may be that no assassin can easily reach her now, especially if she is guarded by dragons and loyal Dothraki. By the time she might attempt an invasion, the realm could be too fractured by the Baratheon-Lannister conflict to present a united front. He paused, letting the notion hang. I wonder where that leaves you, my lord. You who once sought to protect Robert from the Targaryens, now forced to serve a false king. Might you consider a different path if the princess arrives with fire in her wake? Ned's eyes narrowed. You speak dangerously. Varys gave a faint smile. I merely highlight possibilities. The realm is a board, and you are a piece placed most unfortunately. But perhaps you can still move, if the right impetus arises. Ned bristled. I am no piece. I stand for my family's safety. That is all. Of course, Varys replied, unruffled. And you must do what is necessary. I simply advise you to be prepared for developments regarding Daenerys Targaryen. If she truly has dragons, the Lannisters will redouble their efforts to find and destroy her. They might demand your help, or require the North's support against this new threat. It could be an opportunity, depending on your perspective. Ned didn't like the gleam in Varys's eye. The master of whisperers always played multiple angles. Still, the news left him reeling. Dragons in the world again, just as the White Walkers stirred in the far north, if the rumors from the Wall were to be believed. Everything was converging into a maelstrom beyond anything Westeros had seen in generations. Thank you for the warning, Ned said gruffly. Varys bowed. I live to serve the realm. Then he vanished as quietly as he had come, leaving Ned alone with the gulls circling over the bay. The wind carried the scent of salt, and the tide of memory pulled Ned back to years past, when he had joined Robert's rebellion to depose the Targaryens. Now, ironically, a new Targaryen might rise while the Baratheon line was in disarray, indeed, while the rightful Baratheons warred among themselves. And Ned Stark was forced to play the puppet of the Lannisters. He pressed a hand to his brow, wishing for the cool winds of the north. Dragons. He remembered the old stories from his youth, Aegon's conquest, Harrenhal's downfall, the Field of Fire. If a new Targaryen queen arrived with the same power, what chance would the knights of Westeros have unless they united? And how could they unite under a false king who sowed cruelty and fear? The realm was fracturing, precisely what a conqueror might exploit. But would that be any better than Lannister rule? The moral geometry was impossible, and Ned felt trapped on all sides. As the year turned, the war began in earnest. Renly marched out of Highgarden with the Tyrell host, capturing several smaller castles in the Stormlands, proclaiming himself the rightful king to cheering crowds. The banners of the Rose and the Stag fluttered together over newly taken keeps. His queen, Margaery Tyrell, stood as a symbol of unity. Meanwhile, Stannis launched naval raids from Dragonstone, attacking Crownland's villages. The coast was left vulnerable. Joffrey raged, demanding a massive retaliation, but Tywin advocated patience and careful strategy. Ned watched from the sidelines, forced to wear the colors of House Stark but stand among the Lannisters in council. Reports from the north were sparse. Robb had summoned the Stark bannermen, but whether he was truly marching south was uncertain. Each letter Ned received was short, written in code. Robb seemed to be at once preparing for war and stalling. He mentioned Walder Frey's demands: the marriage of a Stark to a Frey daughter, or some similar arrangement, in exchange for crossing at the twins. Ned recognized the cunning of old Walder. One evening, Sansa confided in Ned that she was terrified of the prospect of Robb's army clashing with Lannisters. "I don't want him to fight on Joffrey's side," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Robb hates them, he must. Why must the North help King Joffrey?" Ned stroked her hair. "Because if we do not, the Lannisters might suspect treason and turn against us now," he explained gently. "We cannot afford that, my sweet girl. We must walk this path for as long as it takes to ensure your safety. If the time comes when the realm can be set right, I promise you I will act." He wished he could offer her a simpler truth, but the world was not simple. Arya, overhearing from the corridor, frowned fiercely. "Why can't we just fight them? We're Starks." Ned fixed her with a weary look. "Because, child, that would be the fastest way to see us all dead." Arya's eyes flashed, but she said nothing further. She only retreated to her room, presumably to hack at a straw dummy with her wooden sword. Ned felt the weight of fatherhood and lordship pressing down like a millstone around his neck. Then came the summons that changed everything. Tywin convened an urgent war council in the Red Keep's Great Hall. Dozens of lords, knights, and captains filled the space, murmuring anxiously. At the high table sat King Joffrey, looking uncharacteristically serious, with Cersei and Tywin at his sides. Ned was called forward among the principal advisors. When quiet fell, Tywin spoke in a voice that carried to every corner. "The situation is as follows. Renly Baratheon's host moves toward Storm's End. Stannis Baratheon's fleet has landed men near Rosby, threatening the approach to King's Landing. Our outriders have clashed with them. We will soon need to deploy the main crown forces to prevent the city from falling under siege." A ripple of tension spread. Joffrey squared his shoulders. "I will lead my knights into battle personally," he proclaimed. "The people must see their king defend them." Tywin's mouth thinned slightly, but he bowed his head. "Your Grace's courage is admirable, but the Hand's counsel is that you remain in the city to maintain order. Warfare is unpredictable." Joffrey's eyes flashed with annoyance, but he glanced at his mother, who gave a tiny nod, and ultimately he relented with a scowl. "Fine, but the Gold Cloaks and the Kingsguard will lead the advance. I want that usurper, Stannis, crushed." Cersei laid a hand on her son's arm. "And so it shall be. Let the realm see that Joffrey will not be challenged." Tywin continued, "We have also learned that Renly has gained the support of a faction of the Stormlords. If he secures Storm's End, he will hold a formidable fortress from which to strike either King's Landing or the Reach. We must act swiftly. I will march south with a large contingent of our forces to engage Renly, while another part of our army remains here under Ser Adam Marbrand to defend against Stannis." Ned listened intently. If Tywin marched south, the city might be left with fewer Lannister troops. An opening, perhaps. But that also meant Joffrey might grow more unpredictable without Tywin's presence. Tywin's gaze shifted to Ned. "Lord Stark, the time has come for the North to honor its obligations. Has your son arrived with his banners?" The question fell like a hammer in the silent hall. Ned forced himself to keep his voice steady. "I expect him soon, my lord. The crossing at the Twins must be negotiated with Lord Frey." Tywin's features hardened. "Then see it done. The realm cannot wait forever. We march in a fortnight. Should your forces fail to appear, we will not look kindly upon it." Ned felt a dozen sets of eyes on him. "Understood," he said. His thoughts spun. A fortnight was scant time. Robb might not even have left Winterfell yet, or perhaps he was en route. Either way, this ultimatum put them in a vice. When the council broke, Ned slipped away to write a desperate letter to Robb, urging him to move quickly, or at least to appear to do so. He wrote in code about the potential advantage if Tywin left the city, and how that might open an opportunity. Then he sealed it with the Stark sigil and handed it to a trusted messenger, praying it would reach his son in time. In the days that followed, Tywin's preparations to march south dominated the city. Wagons were loaded with arms and provisions, blacksmiths toiled night and day, and knights polished their armor. Joffrey paraded about, inspecting his soldiers, brandishing a sword he scarcely knew how to wield. Sansa was forced to watch with the other ladies, offering polite applause whenever the Boy King demanded admiration. Arya hid in the shadows, observing. She confided to Ned at supper one night, "They're so proud of themselves, strutting around in lion-liveried cloaks, but half the men don't look like they've ever fought a real battle." Ned nodded grimly. He suspected many were fresh recruits, city rabble pressed into service. The real Lannister veterans were mostly stationed with Tywin's main host near Harrenhal, or had marched to the Riverlands. "War devours the green ones first," he said softly. "Pray we do not see it devour more than that." Arya lowered her gaze. "If it reaches the city, I'll fight," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Ned reached across the table to still her hand. "You'll do as I say, child. If it comes to a siege, you and your sister must stay safe. Promise me." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right," but her eyes flashed with stubborn independence. A week later, new tidings from the north arrived, surprising everyone. Robb Stark and a host of northern bannermen had crossed the Neck, apparently forging some agreement with Lord Frey. More men were joining him in the Riverlands. Rumor said the banners of House Umber, House Glover, and House Bolton were marching beneath the direwolf. Tywin received the news during a final strategy session. A thin smile curved his lips. "So the young wolf has come south at last," he mused. "That is well. He will have to coordinate with our forces if he hopes to defeat Renly or Stannis. Summon him to Harrenhal to join the main army." Ned tried to keep his face calm, though a spark of hope glimmered inside him. Robb had indeed moved. The question was, on whose side, truly? Or was he making a show of loyalty while forging alliances with the Tullus? The boy was young, but perhaps he had the cunning to play both sides. Ned prayed it was so. Tywin turned to Ned. "Advise your son to meet Ser Stafford Lannister on the road, or to come to Harrenhal directly. We cannot have the North drifting about uncoordinated in the Riverlands." Ned nodded. "I will write to him." Cersei, seated to Tywin's right, kept her expression neutral. Joffrey was absent from this meeting, busy terrorizing stable boys or something equally petty. For a moment, the tension in the room felt like a coiled spring. Everyone knew that a large northern host in the Riverlands could tilt the balance. Would they truly fight for Joffrey, or might they turn on the Lannisters the moment the battle was joined? Tywin, with typical confidence, seemed certain he could force the issue. "The boy will obey," he declared, "because Lord Stark is here in King's Landing, and if the boy defies us, we have his father and his sisters." Ned's blood ran cold. There it was, stated openly. A reminder that he was hostage as much as advisor. But he bowed his head. "I will urge him to follow the king's commands." Tywin rolled up the map. "Good. Our march begins in 3 days. The king remains in the city under a strong garrison. Cersei will handle any domestic matters, including the threat of Stannis along the coast. I expect full cooperation from you, Lord Stark, in all these endeavors. Is that clear?" Ned forced an even tone. "Crystal clear." And so, the city bustled with final preparations. Horses were shoed, wagons loaded, supply lines arranged. Tywin planned to lead a portion of the Lannister strength south, leaving behind a significant force under the command of Kevan Lannister and the Gold Cloaks under Janos Slynt. Joffrey crowed that he would personally ride out to greet any victory, but for now, he would honor his father's city with his presence. The irony made Ned's head pound. On the morning of departure, the Red Keep's courtyard was a sea of crimson banners. Trumpets sounded as Tywin and his knights assembled. The hand of the king, clad in gleaming armor chased with gold, mounted a powerful destrier. Around him were men sworn to Casterly Rock, along with some captive allies from lesser houses, and an honor guard of the city watch, their cloaks shining in the dawn light. Cersei stood on a balcony, Sansa just behind her, forced to watch. Ned and Arya watched from a lower vantage point. Tywin raised a hand, and the column began to move out, clattering over the drawbridge, winding down toward the city gates. The spectacle aimed to impress any who doubted Lannister might. Ned felt a complex churn in his gut. On the one hand, if Tywin left the city, that might open a path for Ned to maneuver. On the other, the Lannisters still held King's Landing in force, and Tywin's potential victories on the battlefield would only strengthen Joffrey's position. When the last of the knights had marched out, the courtyard settled into an uneasy hush. Joffrey, from the balcony, proclaimed a day of festival in honor of the mighty Lannister host. But the city's mood seemed more fearful than festive. In the distance, one could hear the ocean's roar and recall that Stannis lurked somewhere at sea. That night, Ned received a visit from Varys in his solar. The spymaster slipped in quietly, candlelight dancing on his silk robes. "Lord Stark," he greeted with a small bow. "I thought you might wish to hear the latest tidings from the wharves." Ned set aside the letter he was writing to Robb. "What is it?" Varys drew closer, voice hushed. "Stannis' ships have been sighted off the coast near Duskendale. He may attempt a landing to march on King's Landing while Tywin is away." Ned's eyes widened. "That soon?" "Indeed. He moves with purpose, perhaps anticipating that the capital is weakened. Should he breach the walls, King Joffrey's reign would be in jeopardy." A hint of sly amusement touched Varys's lips. "But you, my lord, you remain inside the walls." Ned understood the implication. If Stannis arrived and besieged the city, Ned might find a chance to act from within. But how? The gold cloaks were still mostly loyal to Joffrey, or to whomever paid them. Kevan Lannister and Janos Slynt commanded thousands of men. Even if Ned tried to rally them to Stannis' side by revealing the truth of Joffrey's parentage, he would risk Sansa's and Arya's lives in the immediate upheaval. He sighed. "I cannot openly betray the Lannisters while my daughters are at risk, Varys. You know this." Varys spread his hands sympathetically. "I do indeed. However, I also know that if the city is taken by Stannis, the Lannisters may lose their hold on your daughters regardless. War is cruel and unpredictable. We can only prepare for the best outcome." Ned grimaced. "And what outcome is that in your eyes?" "Peace," Varys said, though his eyes betrayed the impossibility of that dream. "A stable realm where no more blood is shed. But that, alas, seems unlikely. All we can do is mitigate the suffering." He paused. "If you see a chance to end this false monarchy and prevent a sack of the city, you might seize it. King's Landing still remembers the horror when Tywin's men ransacked it during Robert's rebellion. If a siege occurs again, the small folk will suffer." Ned closed his eyes momentarily, recalling how his father and brother had died in this city, how thousands had perished in the final days of the Mad King's rule. "I will do what I can to protect the innocents," he said quietly. Varys nodded, stepping back. "I believe you, Lord Stark. I only hope the tides of war allow you that mercy." With that, he glided out into the corridor like a shadow. Days passed under the looming threat of Stannis' fleet. The city watch tightened its patrols along the walls. Archers manned the battlements, and scorpions were readied for incoming ships. Joffrey took to wearing a breastplate etched with gold, swaggering about and shouting orders at the city guard, though he lacked any real martial skill. Sansa found herself forced to stand beside him on the ramparts, looking out over Blackwater Bay, while he boasted about how he would mount Stannis' head on a spike. Ned, for his part, quietly assessed the city's defenses. King's Landing could be a formidable place to attack. Its walls were high, the gates strong. But Stannis was cunning, a seasoned commander. If he decided to storm the city, it would be no easy fight, especially if the defenders were disorganized or if sabotage occurred from within. At times, Ned was tempted to find a way to open the gates for Stannis, if it meant ending Joffrey's rule swiftly and ensuring the least bloodshed. But that would be a direct betrayal guaranteed to spark the Lannisters into slaughtering Sansa and Arya. One twilight, Ned stood atop the Iron Throne's dais, a reluctant figure in the Grand Hall. Joffrey had summoned the entire court, presumably to announce something. Torchlight flickered across the polished floors, shadows dancing against the columns. Courtiers and lords waited in uneasy hush. Sansa stood with her septa near the front. Arya lingered behind pillars, as was her habit, half hidden from view. At last, Joffrey entered in a swirl of crimson robes, the crown perched on his golden hair. He took the throne, and Cersei stood at his right hand. Janos Slynt and Kevan Lannister flanked them. Then Joffrey spoke, his young voice amplified by the hall's acoustics. "Loyal subjects," he began, "I bring you tidings of war. The usurper Stannis Baratheon dares to threaten our city. He sails with a fleet of traitors, hoping to dethrone me. Me, the rightful king." A murmur rose, quickly silenced by a gesture from Kevan Lannister. Joffrey lifted a gauntlet-clad hand. "I will not cower behind these walls. We will meet him on the seas and crush his ships. Our loyal gold cloaks and knights will rain fire upon them. Any man who captures a foe shall be rewarded in gold. Double if they bring me the usurper's head." Cersei inclined her head, her lips curved in a cool smile. "The king speaks truly. We have prepared wildfire casks along the walls, courtesy of the Alchemists' Guild. Their use will ensure that any ships venturing too close meet a fiery end." Ned's pulse quickened. Wildfire, the dreaded substance capable of burning flesh, wood, stone, and even steel. If used improperly, it could backfire and engulf the city. He recalled stories of the Mad King's last plot to burn King's Landing with caches of wildfire. Was Cersei so desperate to destroy Stannis that she'd risk the entire capital? Joffrey's grin widened. "Yes, the green flames will devour Stannis's fleet. We will watch them burn from these very ramparts. That will teach the realm not to question my birthright." He cast a gloating look at Ned, as if expecting him to cheer. Ned remained stony-faced. The crowd offered a ragged chorus of "Long live the king," though it lacked true enthusiasm. Many among the assembled recognized the danger of wildfire, and the name Stannis Baratheon held fearsome weight. But they dared not speak against Joffrey's plan. Joffrey drummed his fingers on the throne's arm. "Bring me Lord Stark," he said suddenly. "Come, Warden of the North, kneel before your king." Ned frowned but obeyed, stepping forward with measured dignity. He bent the knee at the base of the dais, refusing to meet Joffrey's gaze. "I have a task for you, Lord Stark," Joffrey proclaimed, loud enough for all to hear. "When the battle begins, you will command a detachment of archers on the walls overlooking the Blackwater. You will ensure that any man who tries to flee, or any traitor who tries to open the gates for Stannis, is shot without mercy. Will you do that for your king?" Ned's stomach twisted. Joffrey wanted him to execute any potential turncoats among the defenders, effectively forcing Ned to prove his loyalty by killing the city's own men if they dared retreat or sabotage. "I will do my duty," Ned said, voice taut. Joffrey smirked. "Good. Let this be a lesson to any who question Stark loyalty." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Ned rose, wishing he could throttle the little bastard on the spot. But that would be death for him and his daughters. So he maintained composure. Joffrey dismissed the assembly soon after, leaving the echoes of his threat behind. Ned turned to see Sansa's pale face. She cast him a worried glance, as if apologizing for the humiliations he endured. Arya, from her shadowed vantage, clenched her fists in silent rage. Ned felt the churn of dread in his gut. Once again, Joffrey had pinned him under a vile edict, ensuring that if the city's defenders faltered, Ned would be the one to punish them. He was to be a watchdog on behalf of the throne he despised. That night, Ned's sleep was invaded by nightmares. He dreamt of a raging inferno along the Blackwater, green flames licking the sky, screams echoing off the city walls. He dreamt of Sansa and Arya trapped in the Red Keep while the gates were battered down. He dreamt of the voice of his father calling to him from the flames, just as in the days of the Mad King. Waking in a cold sweat, he wondered if all the horrors of Robert's rebellion were about to repeat themselves. But this time he was bound and gagged instead of free to fight. Yet an ember of defiance refused to die. If Stannis truly attacked, if the city was on the brink, perhaps Ned could find a way to spare the innocents and shield his daughters. Perhaps he could help open the gates from within without condemnation falling on Sansa and Arya. But that would require precise timing and subtlety. And if Joffrey's plan with the wildfire went awry, King's Landing might turn into a funeral pyre for everyone, friend and foe alike. At dawn, Ned donned simple armor and walked the city walls. Guards and crossbowmen were stationed at intervals, peering out to sea. The morning air was chill, and the gulls screeched overhead. He exchanged minimal words with the men, who saluted him as the Warden of the North. Many recognized him as a figure of stern repute, though they remained uncertain about his alliance with the Lannisters. Some gave him cautious respect, others harbored silent resentment. He paused at a parapet overlooking the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. Faintly, on the horizon, a shape of sails might be glimpsed if one stared hard enough. Stannis's vanguard, perhaps, or merchant ships seeking refuge. The sea gave nothing away. Footsteps approached. Ser Jacelyn Bywater, a captain of the City Watch, newly promoted after the reorganization that followed Robert's death. Bywater inclined his head. "My Lord Stark, the men are uneasy. Rumors swirl that Stannis's fleet is large, that he has experienced captains who might break the chain across the bay." Ned recalled that Tywin had once arranged for a massive chain to be forged under the city's waters, a defense to trap invading ships. An idea credited to Tyrion Lannister in another timeline, though Tyrion was off in the west or with the army by now, absent from this version of events. "If Stannis tries a direct assault," Ned said, "we will see how the chain holds, but that's for the king's men to decide. We can only do our part." Bywater nodded slowly, not revealing whether he supported Joffrey wholeheartedly or simply did his duty. "Yes, my lord." He hesitated. If things go ill, I trust you will remember the men who tried to keep the peace. Not all of us relish the cruelty we see." Ned looked at him, meeting the captain's eye. "I do remember," he said quietly. "I know not all men here are beasts." Then he left it at that. There was little else he could promise. Later, Ned made his way back to the Red Keep, his mind swirling with contingency plans. If Stannis attacked, Ned might be forced to man the walls. Could he find a moment to ensure Sansa and Arya escaped? The city might be sealed, but perhaps there were hidden tunnels. Varys likely knew them. Could Ned trust him to smuggle his daughters out if chaos erupted? He resolved to speak with Varys about it, though carefully. The spider had his own aims, but the man genuinely seemed to care for the innocence of the realm, or so he claimed. The risk was that Cersei or Joffrey would sense a plot. Ned needed to be cunning, something he had never excelled at in a city of snakes. For the next few days, a tense vigil gripped King's Landing. Archers remained on high alert. Servants whispered about an impending doom. Cersei walked the halls with a confident tilt to her chin, though Ned sensed her worry. If Stannis broke through, her power would vanish overnight. She might even meet the same fate as the Mad King if Stannis decided on a harsh retribution. No wonder she was willing to gamble with wildfire. Sansa tried to keep her composure. She spent hours in the Sept praying for peace, for the safety of her family. Both her northern kin and, in a confused way, even the king she was betrothed to. Arya paced like a caged direwolf, practicing her stances, occasionally glaring at Joffrey's banners as if she could set them aflame by will alone. Ned tried to keep them calm, but he was no better, waking each morning expecting to hear the alarm bells that Stannis had arrived. Finally, it happened. Near dusk on a day when the sky was bruised with clouds, watchers on the walls spotted the sails of a large fleet approaching from the east. Trumpets sounded an alarm. Joffrey personally hurried to the ramparts with a swarm of gold cloaks. Servants rushed to gather crossbow bolts, wildfire casks, and pitch. Ned followed, heart hammering in his chest. The time for battle had come. From the city walls, he could see dozens, possibly hundreds of ships. Tall-masted war galleys, lean, swift caravel-like vessels. Stannis' forces, if the banners were to be believed. They rode steadily up the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, intending to break through to the city's docks. Archers lined the walls in thick ranks. Joffrey called for them to be ready on his command. Ned surveyed the approach. If the chain was in place across the river, once Stannis' ships passed a certain point, it would be raised, trapping them. Then the wildfire casks, perched along the walls, would be unleashed, catapulted down upon the trapped fleet. The strategy was brutal, reminiscent of what Tyrion had once devised in another turning of the wheel. Only now, Joffrey was the one crowing about the plan, as if he understood its intricacies. A chill wind blew off the water. Ned stood by a group of archers assigned to him, each one glancing nervously between their lord and the approaching fleet. The men recognized Stark's grim posture. Some found comfort in it, others found fear. If Eddard Stark looked so uneasy, the battle must be dreadful indeed. Below, in the gloom, small Lannister boats crept into position, ready to ignite the wildfire at the crucial moment. The tension was suffocating. Ned could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. He searched the deck of the nearest enemy ship, hoping he might glimpse Stannis. Of course, that was impossible at such a distance. But the presence of so many war galleys confirmed that the older Baratheon brother was serious. At last, a booming voice from the walls signaled the chain was raised. A distant grinding of heavy iron pulleys reverberated through the night. The leading ships plowed onward, oblivious. Joffrey raised a hand gleefully. "Release the wildfire," he screeched. A volley of greenish casks soared over the walls, trailing sparks. They smashed upon the water and the decks of ships below, shattering into neon-green fire that billowed outward in impossible bursts. Screams followed. Flames clung to sails, rigging, and men, devouring wood and flesh alike. The archers let loose a rain of arrows, many of them dipping into the wildfire, catching flame, and streaking across the darkening sky like hateful comets. The front line of Stannis' ships erupted into chaos, men diving overboard only to be set ablaze by the burning water. As soon as they tried to turn back, the chain prevented their escape, hemming them in. More casks fell, each explosion sending roiling waves of green flame across the water. The stench of burning tar and flesh wafted up to the battlements. Ned felt sick. This was slaughter on a scale he had rarely witnessed, an inferno that spared no one caught in its path. And yet, the men under his command looked to him for orders. Some of Stannis' rear ships were attempting a retreat, or maybe circling around to find another approach. Joffrey noticed and pointed, shrieking for more casks to be hurled. The boy's face glowed with a ghastly excitement, the reflections of green flames dancing in his eyes. Catapults hurled their payloads. More screams tore through the night. This was not honorable warfare, it was butchery. Stannis' fleet was pinned, battered by flames. Yet many men valiantly tried to row closer to the walls, hoping to storm the city once the fires died. Ned's archers shot them down, fulfilling Joffrey's orders, if only to prevent a direct assault that might become even bloodier. Explosions rocked the water, sending geysers of flames skyward. The heat was so intense that the stone battlements under Ned's feet felt warm. The acrid smoke burned his eyes. He glimpsed men flailing in the green-lit darkness, their screams merging with the roaring blaze. He could almost taste the bitterness of charred flesh in the air. A few of Stannis' ships, at the rear, managed to maintain some semblance of formation. They returned fire with scorpions and catapults of their own, launching stones at the city's defenses. One chunk of masonry crashed into a section of wall, sending men plunging to their deaths. A scattered volley of flaming arrows rained onto the battlements. The watchers nearest Ned cried out as one took an arrow in the throat. Ned ducked behind a merlin, grabbing one of the wounded archers to pull him to safety. The man coughed blood, eyes rolling. Ned winced, pressing a hand to the fatal wound. Another explosion rattled the air, and Ned glimpsed a monstrous column of green flame surging from the river, likely a larger store of wildfire ignited below deck on one of the war galleys. The entire ship went up in a conflagration, showers of splintered wood raining down. In the chaos, Ned heard Joffrey's maniacal laughter. "Burn them all!" the boy shrieked, echoing words once attributed to the Mad King himself. Ned felt a wave of revulsion. If only Robert could see his son now. Moments later, a trumpet blast signaled that the chain had successfully trapped most of the fleet. Another wave of casks soared into the melee, ensuring that any survivors had no escape route. Stannis's men fought back desperately, but they were pinned between the chain and the city's walls. It was a massacre. Even from afar, Ned could see bodies afloat in the green-tinged water, the remains of men who had been cooked alive in their armor. Eventually, as the fires began to subside in places, a cheer went up from the Lannister forces on the walls. The king's tactic had worked. Stannis's fleet was in ruins or scattered. Some handful of ships might have escaped out to sea before the chain was fully raised, but the bulk had been annihilated. Ned forced himself to remain at his post until the last of the threat was gone. His archers shot any boat that tried to make a landing near the mud gate. The city had held. As the night wore on, the flames drifted on the surface of the river, pockets of green glow, and a pall of black smoke covered the sky. The screams of the dying echoed across the water, haunting. Then, as dawn broke, the slaughter ended. What was left of Stannis's fleet had withdrawn or burned. King's Landing had won a Pyrrhic victory. The cost in human life was immense. Soldiers coughed from the smoke, eyes red, while Joffrey pranced along the battlements, exulting in his triumph. Ned leaned on the stone, staring grimly at the carnage below. Bodies bobbed amid burnt timbers, lumps of char. The stench was unbearable. This was no honorable battle but a trap, a savage act of mass murder. He felt ill with the knowledge that he had played a part, standing among the archers. Even if he had tried to sabotage the plan, it would have made no difference. Joffrey had enough men loyal to him to see it through anyway. He closed his eyes. Stannis had been undone by cunning, the very cunning Ned had never possessed. Now, the city cheered King Joffrey for saving them from invasion. The small folk, ignorant or desperate, might hail him as a hero. The truth was far uglier. But war did not care about truth, only about victors and victims. As Ned turned to leave the battlements, he saw Sansa in the distance, standing with a group of ladies who had come to witness the outcome. Even at a remove, he could see the horror on her face as she took in the smoldering remains. Arya was nowhere in sight, probably hidden away in the crowd. Ned silently thanked the gods for that. At least one daughter might be spared the direct sight of this atrocity. Yet, ironically, this victory solidified Joffrey's hold on the throne. With Stannis's fleet destroyed, one major threat was removed. Renly still lingered in the south, Tywin was campaigning, but King's Landing was safe for now. The boy king would be more arrogant than ever, convinced of his invincibility. And Ned Stark would remain the Lannisters' reluctant captive, a wolf in chains, forced to watch the realm drown in blood for the sake of two daughters he loved more than life itself. He descended from the walls, the cheers of the city watch ringing hollow in his ears. Every step felt heavier than the last. This was the price of the choice he had made when he first arrived, the day he accepted Cersei's bribe and smothered the truth about Joffrey's parentage. He had prevented his immediate execution, saved his daughters from a swift punishment, and delayed open war with the North. But the war had come anyway in 1,000 cruel shapes. And now he had witnessed a horror that might rival the worst of the Mad King's era, a glimpse of what Joffrey was capable of if left unchecked. What was the cost of his silence, his complicity? On this dawn of victory, amid the green embers floating on the dark water, Ned Stark wondered if the realm might have been better off had he died an honest man, instead of living as a pawn to such a monstrous child. He had wanted to save the innocent, to spare his daughters, but in the end he stood by as King's Landing wrought an annihilation as savage as any Targaryen dragonfire. And it would only get worse. But there was no turning back time. He could only move forward, searching for the faintest chance to right the scales, to free his daughters and see justice done. Perhaps somewhere beyond the charred remains on the Blackwater, beyond the illusions of triumph in the Red Keep, lay a path to atonement. For now, he walked through the ash-stained courtyard, tired and heartsick, bearing the heavy knowledge that the Game of Thrones had claimed yet more lives, and all he could do was keep breathing, keep planning, and hope that one day the North would rise, and that day he would be ready.